You could be the next command. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Britain I grew up was the most peaceful, gentle society that has ever existed. That has been destroyed.
Opinion polls show immigration is the #1 concern to the British public.
Are you proud to be British?
Yeah, I'm ever so proud.
My name is Stephen Edgington, and in this documentary, I want to find out how Britain became a nation of immigrants. Immigration, the truth. Available at gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Thursday, the 26th of September. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
Wearing masks and working from home if we can really will help prevent infections.
Starmer's fake COVID home. Not only did the Prime Minister use Lord Ali's £18 million penthouse throughout the election period, turns out he was using it for party broadcasts throughout the last Parliament. It has been revealed, including for an address to the nation, telling us all to work from home.
Non-dom gone from London and many other cities. Yes, Sir Keir Starmer's grand plan to tax non-doms will bring in no money at all. That's the fear of Treasury officials. If true, schools and hospitals will miss out on an extra £1 billion of funding.
Oops. And no more ceasefire. Benjamin Netanyahu has denied reports he is close to agreeing a 21-day ceasefire with Hezbollah, as he insists that they will continue fighting against Hamas and Hezbollah until all Israel's war goals are achieved.
Government's bungled prison release scheme. 5 prisoners are still on the loose after almost 40 people were let out of prison by mistake under the government's controversial early release scheme. The Ministry of Justice has admitted.
And blitz on boozers as the threat of an outdoor smoking ban looms over Britain's pubs. It's now reported the government is plotting a sin tax raid on publicans in the autumn budget. I mean, this non-dom story. OK, so in the run-up to the election, as I'm sure everyone remembers, everything, it seemed, every spending commitment was going to be paid for by a crackdown on these rich non-doms who don't deserve this particular tax status that they have. Anyway, a few months down the line, the Treasury officials have actually looked into it. Maybe it's not going to raise any money at all.
Well, this is the...
Could even lose us money.
This is the point. The non-dom scheme was to keep rich people in this country who otherwise would live elsewhere, live offshore. The non-dom tax status was to keep those people in the UK, contributing to the UK. If you get rid of that status, what incentive do these people, many of them, what incentive do they have to stay here if suddenly half of their income is going to go to the state? Well, it's a sad reality. It doesn't seem particularly fair, and I think this is one of the reasons why taxing non-doms was always very, very popular. But the problem is there are other countries in the world We're not the largest economy in the world.
I mean,
These people can choose to live elsewhere.
It's just ideological nonsense. It's the same as slapping VAT on private school fees. Is it really going to save the state any money at all when lots of kids will now be going into the state system, which will require more resources, more teachers, more everything? These policies, actually, when you look into them without an ideological lens, you have to look at the practicalities. Won't save us any money, by the looks of things. Anyway.
And it's led to my favourite headline of the day. Non-dom, long gone from London.
Yes, I tried to change that, but I let him. I let him.
Indulged.
Also want your views on this latest from Keir Starmer. Turns out that he wasn't only using the Penthouse for his son's revision, so that he could revise peacefully was the word that Keir Starmer used, but also for party political broadcasts during the COVID pandemic and some other things. It's all rather odd, isn't it? gbnews.com/your say. Should we get the news?
Emily, thank you and good afternoon. The top stories. The current managing director of Harrods has apologised and said the business failed our colleagues. That's following sexual misconduct allegations about former owner Mohammed al-Fayed. Michael Ward said in a statement that it's clear Mr al-Fayed presided over a toxic culture of secrecy, intimidation, fear of repercussion and sexual misconduct. Mr Ward, who worked for Mr al-Fayed for 4 years, said he wasn't aware of his criminality and abuse and described it as a shameful period in the business's history. 5 women claim they were raped by al-Fayed, who died last year at the age of 94, with a number of others alleging sexual misconduct. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has told the Israeli military to keep fighting with full force in Lebanon, according to his office. Earlier, the IDF said Israel hit 75 Hezbollah targets overnight in the Bekaa region close to Syria. Netanyahu's statement comes after the UK, the US and other allies called for a 21-day ceasefire between Israel and the terror group Hezbollah. Last night, in a joint statement, the 12-strong bloc called for a ceasefire to provide space for diplomacy towards the conclusion of a diplomatic settlement, as well as a ceasefire in Gaza. They said the hostilities were intolerable and presented an unacceptable risk of a broader regional escalation that was neither in the interest of the people of Israel or Lebanon. It comes after Israel's military chief told troops yesterday that extensive airstrikes in Lebanon targeting Hezbollah could pave the way for them to enter enemy territory. Former chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Elwood, believes a ceasefire is imminent.
I think it will happen in the next 72 hours. It takes some time. This is a very complex operation to get the scale of troop numbers that are required, although I'm sure the IDF, the Israeli Defence Forces, would have been preparing for this for some time.
The family of a teenager who was murdered in Wolverhampton say they're devastated, totally heartbroken and confused. 2 12-year-old boys found guilty of murdering Sean Sisahai in a random machete attack are set to be sentenced. The killers were convicted in June of murdering the 19-year-old who was stabbed in the heart and suffered a skull fracture in November last year. They're believed to be the youngest defendants convicted of murder in Britain, since Robert Thompson and John Venables, both aged 11, were found guilty in 1993 of killing 2-year-old James Bulger. The boys, both now 13, face a mandatory juvenile life sentence and are appearing in custody at Nottingham Crown Court for the start of a 2-day hearing. The sentence is due to be passed tomorrow. A man's been charged with the murder of a 15-year-old boy who was stabbed with a zombie knife in south-east London. Deshaun Campbell was found with a stab injury in Woolwich on Sunday evening. He died at the scene. 18-year-old Jacob Loswich has been charged in connection with his death. He was remanded in custody and appears in court today. The Metropolitan Police says a second man in his 50s who was arrested has been released without charge. Now, a landmark AUKUS meeting is being held in the UK as the Defence Secretary hosts counterparts from the US and Australia in London amid efforts to build a fleet of nuclear-powered submarines. John Healey's hosting Richard Marles, who's also Anthony Albanese's Deputy Prime Minister, and US Defence Secretary Lloyd James Austin III at the Security Partnership meeting. If Australia and the UK sign a treaty, the Westminster government's estimated the SSN AUKUS submarine build project would unlock UK exports into the billions of pounds. The Ministry of Defence says it'll support UK jobs for more than 21,000 people And the government also confirmed the new treaty will outline the UK's relationship with Australia on submarine cooperation. Cyber attackers have caused disruption at 19 UK railway stations. Network Rail confirmed the Wi-Fi systems at stations including London Euston, Manchester Piccadilly and major stations across Liverpool, Birmingham and Edinburgh were all affected. People reported logging onto the Wi-Fi at the stations and being met with a screen about terror attacks in Europe. British Transport Police are investigating. The rail provider says it believes other organisations, not just rail stations, have also been impacted. And an amber warning for heavy rain has been issued by the Met Office, warning of further flooding and travel disruption across large parts of the UK. The new alert covers the Midlands and parts of the southwest from 6 o'clock this evening until 6 a.m. tomorrow. The Met Office warns nearly 3 inches of rain could fall over several hours in the worst affected regions. They also say with rivers continuing to rise after the rain clears. Several yellow weather warnings are already currently in place for large parts of the country until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 9 minutes past midday. Now, Sir Keir Starmer is expected to use his speech at the UN General Assembly later today to promise the UK is returning to global responsible leadership.
Well, this comes as the Middle East teeters on the brink of all-out conflict, and the war in Ukraine continues to grind on.
However, his use of a Labour donor Lord Ali's £18 million Covent Garden penthouse to film a message calling on people to work from home when COVID guidelines were still in place threatens to overshadow his appearance on the world stage. It, of course, raises questions as to whether he himself was following the rules at the time.
Yes, it does indeed. Well, should we take a little look at that now infamous clip?
The new variant Omicron is spreading fast, and the argument that we don't know enough about it doesn't stack up. We may not be certain how dangerous it is, but we do know that lives are at risk. At times like this, we must all put the national interest first and play by the rules. Getting jabbed, wearing masks, and working from home if we can really will help prevent infections.
Working from home if we can. Well, let's go now.
Our own home?
Yeah, you're apparently so. Let's go to New York and speak to our political editor, Christopher Hope. Christopher, what are we expecting the Prime Minister to focus on today? And what do you make of these new revelations about the use of Lord Ali's penthouse?
Yes, hi Tom, hi Emily from early morning here in New York. Yeah, we'll come to that in a second, but the big day here for Sir Keir Starmer is his talking to the UN General Assembly, the first Labour leader, Labour Prime Minister to do so in 15 years. Lots of firsts all the time, of course, in the early months of a Labour Prime Minister being in charge. He's speaking to the UN General Assembly at 10:15 UK time. I'm sure we'll bring that to you if we can on GB News. He's talking to other world leaders too. Two big issues here dominating all the chat in this big week for diplomacy in New York. He's talking about the war in Ukraine. The big question is whether the UK will allow these missiles to be used, the UK missiles to be used, Storm Shadow missiles against Russia in Russia. There's a joint statement also about Israel and Lebanon border calling for an immediate 3-week ceasefire. Of course, Britain's been told to leave there immediately. And we've got comments from the UN Secretary General overnight, Antonio Guterres. He says hell has broken loose on the Lebanese border, and that's why it's so important to get that fixed. So that's what's happening here. He's meeting with business leaders too to try and drive the call for investment in the UK. But aside from that, the headlines are still being dominated by Freebiegate. You're seeing there the issue with Lord Ali's flat. We're told that he was trying to use this flat over the past few years. He didn't want to do broadcasting from his home where it might invade his privacy, so he went to Lord Ali's flat. But I think in the clip you showed there, he had put some Christmas cards behind the desk he was sitting at. Was that his home? Last night I did interview Sir Keir Starmer, a range of issues to discuss, immigration, the Homes for Heroes idea, but I put in one question I thought was interesting. We heard dealing with this week from Emma Buck, who's a Labour MP for South Shields. She gives away her freebies, or she gives them back to charity. I asked the PM if he would do that.
A Labour MP for South Shields, Emma Buck, gives her freebies to charity. She gives them away. Why won't you give things you've had for free back to charity or to a good cause?
Well, all that happened is I wanted somewhere safe and quiet for my son to do his GCSE preparation. I needed it to be secure because of the situation we were in. No exchange of money. There's nothing to give away.
So there you have Keir Starmer avoiding that question. Why don't you just deal with the issue now, give away all the freebies, the spectacles, the clothing, give it away, move on, and say it won't happen again. I get from him, though, in other interviews he's done here, he's pretty determined to say he'll keep having freebies, going to the football. He thinks it's all part of the conversation in our political life. And just before I go back to you from New York here, there are other big meetings happening here. We know they met with Ursula von der Leyen, the European Union president, yesterday. That's ahead of a meeting next week. So while we're at the Tory conference, Tom and Emily, do keep watching what Keir Starmer's up to. He's we're expected to meet with Ursula von der Leyen in Brussels. He says, the number 10 say, it's about the EU-UK reset. He has told her in terms, I want to reset our relationship with the EU and make Brexit work for the British people. That is different to meeting with individual countries for bilateral deals. This is saying, well, I'm meeting with the EU, and that could be all sorts of things, maybe even under 30s, freedom of movement. And just finally, a whisper from New York today, he might meet Donald Trump today. I'm trying to get confirmation, we don't know it yet, but we could see Starmer-Trump meeting happening.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed. Christopher Hope, our political editor in New York, just running us through some of the top headlines, really, that's going on today for Keir Starmer over in the United States. Very cosy picture there with Ursula von der Leyen, all about resetting the UK-EU relationship.
Yeah, and what does that exactly mean? Are we going to be taking on more EU laws? Certainly not ditching more EU laws that we already had on our books. In a little bit later in the programme, we're going to talk about this issue the EU has legislated on artificial intelligence. Lots of new programmes that the United States has been getting this week, Europe and the UK haven't been getting access to. Mark Zuckerberg's been saying that the EU's not going to get its new AI systems at all because of the overbearing regulatory framework. But really interesting, this Trump meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. Will that go ahead? Like to be a fly on the wall to that one, maybe. But yes, this issue of freebies is not just about the freebies. It's also now about him being deceptive, pretending, appearing to be working from home when he gave this national address to the country during the COVID era, where everyone was being told to mask up, everyone was being told to stay at home, work from home, only go out if it's 100% necessary. Also, we're hearing that he also delivered a message on the day the Queen died from, again, the £18 million penthouse, courtesy of Lord Wahid Ali. It's all very odd. How much time was he spending at this place? Number 10 have said it was just a one-off, this COVID message. Was it? Doesn't look like it.
Well, a website behind some of these revelations is, of course, the Guido Fawkes website. Delighted now to be able to speak to the Guido Fawkes reporter, Max Young. Max, thanks for joining us. Your website has, of course, been revealing a lot of the scoops behind this. How did you come across the fact that Starmer has been using this house, this penthouse?
I've got to say it was incredible. We did a through the keyhole piece looking at what that penthouse is actually like on the inside, because apparently Labour are completely furious that the luxury designer Sophie Ashby did a whole photo compilation of her fancy designs inside, and that was before it was sold. So it got sold, it looks a bit different now, but they kept the shelving unit, and with someone in Guido Towers recognised that shelving unit. Which is exactly the same one. Very, very nice, very fancy. And it kept on cropping up. We had a look at 2021, there it is. And then amazingly later, the day that the Queen died, there he is in the evening. Dimmed lights, the family photos have been taken away, some dark urns have been replaced, but it's recognisably the same wall and the same shelf in that £18 million penthouse in Soho.
So what do you think's going on here? Is it a case... Is it the case that Keir Starmer and his family were using this property far more than anyone knew, practically living there, it seems? Of course, the revelation that £20,000 worth of accommodation was used for the Prime Minister because his son needed somewhere calm and peaceful to revise. OK, that was one thing, several months over the summer. But then also doing these broadcasts back in 2021, I mean, it almost sounds as if this place was a second home.
Yeah, it certainly does, yeah. And I've got to say, 20k for a 3-ensuite bedroom penthouse, 18 million, that's quite a bargain, isn't it? So an interesting figure on that declaration there. So the Starmers say that they moved in to for his son to have somewhere peaceful to study in the GCSEs, which is fine. But apparently they stayed there for 3 weeks after GCSEs were over. So I don't know why. Maybe that was some post-exam revision just to go over what they might have gotten wrong in the exams. And it looks like it's been used sort of as a on and off office for about 3 years now. I mean, Keir was meant to work from home. He spoke incredibly in that video from 21 about working from home. And he could have worked from the parliamentary office. He could have worked from the leader of the opposition's office in Labour HQ. Why was he at Lord Ali's £18 million penthouse? These questions just keep coming. And the whole thing is the hypocrisy. I mean, these guys created such a culture of sanctimony. And now it's exactly the same. I mean, what's going on? It's left to us hacks to dig out one story after another. And Number 10's lines that they brief out, they don't work. So last night, The Guardian was told, or it was understood by The Guardian, that it was used as a one-off. Half an hour later, we put up the Queen Elizabeth tribute, which is done in the same place. So it's not a one-off, is it? If I had any advice for Number 10's media spinners, I would say that when you're issuing defensive briefing lines, try to anticipate what the next story might be, or maybe get Starmer to tell you the truth about what's actually been going on and how often he's been using this place.
Max, it has to be said that your most recent piece on this, it seems to have a bit of a warning in red text at the bottom, anticipating perhaps more stories coming about. Have you spotted him using this penthouse on more occasions, or can't you tell us?
Well, I'm going to keep my powder dry for the moment, but rest assured, rumours are flying extremely high pace throughout Westminster. So watch this space. There's a lot of sourcing that needs to be done, but we're working on it dutifully, as you might imagine.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Max Young, reporter at Guido Fawkes, the website that's revealed quite a bit about the use of this particular penthouse, courtesy of Lord Waheed Ali. Thank you very much indeed. It's worth also noting that there's a new story when it comes to Waheed Ali and the donations he's given. It turns out that a Labour MP took a £1.2 million loan from Lord Ali to buy a house for her terminally ill sister. It goes to show, I mean, whether that transaction is morally right, morally wrong, that's not the issue here. The issue is just how much this particular one man is donating and helping out Labour ministers. It's very odd. Very odd. Anyway.
Yes, we're going to turn to the Middle East briefly because Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is telling his military to keep fighting with full force as he refuses to respond to calls for this ceasefire.
Yes, earlier it was believed a 21-day ceasefire would be implemented between Israel and Hezbollah following joint calls from the United States and the United Kingdom and other ally nations.
But now that's all been thrown into doubt, with the Israel Defence Forces also insisting they will continue to fight in Gaza until their goals are achieved.
Well, joining us now is retired British Army officer Colonel Simon Diggins. Simon, thank you very much indeed. Can you make sense of this for us? Because we were told a little bit earlier today that a ceasefire was on the cards, that we could see a 21-day ceasefire very soon indeed. And now both sides of the conflict are saying absolutely not. We're going to continue.
I think one of the issues here, thank you, good morning to you, good afternoon to you all now. I think one of the issues here is you might call this sort of the people who are surrounding the ring, people like the Americans, ourselves, the French, who look at this or try to look as objectively and say it's not in best interest to attack into Lebanon, versus the internal pressures that Benjamin Netanyahu is facing at the moment, which says that the fighting must continue. Some of those pressures are absolutely legitimate. You know, the 60,000 Israelis have been displaced, but there's also the kind of the influence of the far right there, including his finance minister, according to our Chancellor Exchequer, who's saying that Israelis need to attack into southern Lebanon. So these are the pressures that he's facing. The one thing he's not doing, he's not prepared to do at the moment, is actually look at the possibility of a proper ceasefire, because that is the condition which Hezbollah has put in place. Said if there is a ceasefire in Gaza, then they will stop the rocket attacks. And he's not going to do that because of the problems he's got in terms of his own coalition. So that's where we are at the moment. So even people like ourselves who are basically supportive of Israel, saying this is not in your interest, but he is determined, largely I think for his own internal political pressures, to keep going. Whether that translates into an actual formal ground invasion is still to be seen. But clearly, we've heard the Israeli chief of staff preparing his troops, and there's been movements of Israeli forces to the north, indicating they're looking at the options and looking at possibilities.
And that invasion possibility is clearly a big concern. But why do you think it was that this morning there were so many reports, so many sort of almost positive signs towards suggesting that there would be some sort of ceasefire, that there was then knocked out of the water by Netanyahu himself?
I think it's because there are many people within Israel itself, including members of the government, who can recognise that this is probably not the way to solve what is, indubitably one of the worst and most complicated strategic conundrum in the world in terms of that. But there is the politics. And I think it's if you like, the dialogue we've been having. We've seen it with the ceasefire negotiations over Gaza itself. There have been Israeli negotiators, including very high-powered negotiators, the head of Mossad, head of the Shin Bet, negotiating directly through the Qataris about what's going to happen. And then they take the deal back, and then that deal gets scotched by the politics of Israel itself. So that's the challenge that I think the wider community, the world, have got. How do you square those two things?
Simon Diggins, thank you very much indeed. Retired British Army officer, thank you. Well, it's Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We've got lots more coming up on today's show, including 5 prisoners are apparently on the loose after they were mistakenly released under the early release scheme, under the government's early release scheme. Apparently 40 or so were just released mistakenly.
You couldn't make it up.
You couldn't make it up, could you?
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
A furious online debate has been sparked after, well, let's just say a rather large man, he really was big, was snapped trying to fit into his seat on a plane.
It's led to some to ask whether obese passengers should have to pay for extra plane seats so they don't inconvenience others.
Some say, though, that's cruel. So, should plus-size passengers pay extra for plane seats? Let's talk to former presenter of Fat Families, Steve Miller, who's in Stratford-upon-Avon, and the director of All About Obesity, Sarah LeBrock, who's in beautiful Harrogate. Good to see you both this morning. Sarah, what do you think?
Well, we've had this debate before with Steve and I, to be fair, and I think it's one of those things where planes are just not fit for purpose anymore. So people's bodies have been growing over the years. We know this, the obesity rates are increasing, etc. But what's happening to planes is the seats are decreasing in size. So they're just not fit for purpose and not fit for the population. So I think it's just one of these things where we need to be more empathetic to people, that they're trying to fit into an environment that isn't shaped for them at all. So I think we do need to kind of say, well, what's right here? Is it the person not being able to fit in the seat, or is it the seat not being fit for purpose for the person? And I think we need to really, look at things from that perspective as well. Instead of thinking the person's doing something wrong, how about the environment might be doing something wrong?
Steve?
It's not about blaming, but the message you can't put out, in my opinion, is that it's okay to be obese and don't worry about it. You see, what I'm saying here is free plane seats. If you're offering free plane seats, an extra seat, that's going to normalise obesity.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The king of breakfast TV is back. That's right, Britain's favourite TV host, Eamon Holmes, returns to Britain's hottest breakfast programme. Breakfast every day from 6 a.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're
proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is now 12:28. Now, Number 10 has admitted to releasing 37 prisoners by mistake, several of whom have still turned to jail.
Well, the error has been blamed on problems with the government's controversial early release scheme. The Ministry of Justice claimed to be working in tandem with the police to urgently find 5 inmates who are still yet to be returned.
That's as Labour is reportedly drawing up plans to introduce a Texas-style prison system, which would include a points-based approach for good conduct. The government will also look to invest in rehabilitation projects in a bid to curb overcrowding in prisons.
So, is this government in control of its law and order, or has it bungled it? Let's go to our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Olivia, this was the one thing that was not supposed to happen.
Well, absolutely, and it was the one thing that was warned about again and again and again, because not only was this early release scheme controversial, it was also implemented very, very quickly indeed. It was first mooted around the general election in July, and prisoners were actually released from prison on the 10th of September, and there were lots of parole officers saying that they just simply weren't ready to get this all sorted. And that's exactly what happened. People have fallen through the cracks. These 37 prisoners were released under basically a technicality. They were released because it looked like they were eligible, because it looked as though they were in a group which was on the list of people who could be let out, but actually they shouldn't have been. And of those 37, 5 are still on the loose. They're trying to be tracked down at the moment, and 1 has allegedly reoffended in touching a woman inappropriately. So this is a bit of a nightmare story for Keir Starmer, but he seems to be doubling down, if anything. As you mentioned there, he's looking at this Texan-style scheme. Now, when you think of Texas and prisons, I think most people think of the death penalty, but actually Texas has a pretty liberal scheme for prisoners who are in jail for less serious offences, and they can be let out much, much earlier than their sentence, after 25% of their sentence, if they attend various courses in prison, follow a drug rehabilitation programme, etc. So for good behaviour. But going down from the 40% that we're at now to 25% would obviously be hugely controversial again.
Absolutely, especially as it's so easy to send someone to prison in the United States. You have these sort of 3 strikes and you're out rules. So a lot of people for very minor offences end up in prison. Perhaps it makes more sense in the United States to have an early release scheme, whereas for the UK it seems you have to do an awful lot to end up in prison, unless, of course, you're on Facebook or Twitter.
Well, absolutely. I mean, very, very different legal system in the US. And as you say, people do go to prison much more easily. Whereas here, it's already the case that that judges try to avoid sending all but violent criminals to prison. And the Justice Secretary is already talking about closing down lots of women's prisons and keeping people out of prison for non-violent offences. So who exactly would the target group be for an even earlier release scheme? Because the situation that the government got itself into this time is that it tried not to release sort of violent criminals or domestic abusers. They were not on the eligible list. And yet somehow, probably because everything was rushed through so quickly, some of those domestic abusers seem to have slipped through the gaps.
I mean, surely this is on Shamana Mahmood's head, the Justice Secretary. I mean, this is a pretty catastrophic failure.
Well, I mean, the Labour government would argue and have argued that they were in a situation where they didn't have any choice but to rush this through really quickly.
They promised that there would be absolutely no violent offenders let out on this scheme. Domestic abusers, stalkers, whatever else, grievous bodily harm. We know that they have been.
And the rush, the way this was done so quickly, has meant that people have fallen through the gaps. I mean, as I say, the Prime Minister and the Justice Secretary would argue that that it's simply because they had to do something very, very quickly, and you can see where they're coming from. There was a point about 6 weeks ago where there were only about 150 places left in male prisons altogether across the country, and they would say, well, if we didn't release people early, then you would be in a situation where you couldn't send the most violent offenders to jail. So they had a really, really tough decision on their hands. But as you say, they did promise that this wasn't going to happen, and it has happened.
I mean, no wonder the champagne was being popped outside HMP Wandsworth. Yes, anyway, celebratory mood. Thank you very much, Olivia Utley, our political correspondent.
It has sort of
Should they get away with it?
It has all these hallmarks of the Afghanistan withdrawal, or just sort of these things that sort of everyone knew that was going to happen, or clearly that they'd been planning for a while, but then just couldn't execute with any level of competence whatsoever.
Pretty shocking, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've got lots more coming up on today's show. We're going to be talking about this non-dom status, cracking down on this, getting rid of those tax breaks for rich people, actually is not going to bring us in any money. That's what Treasury officials are now saying. Does that, well, it sort of destroys Labour's reasoning, doesn't it, rather?
Yes, strange one. That after the news.
Good afternoon. The top stories. The current managing director of Harrods has apologised and said the business failed our colleagues following sexual misconduct allegations about former owner Mohammed al-Fayed. Michael Ward said in a statement, it's clear Mr al-Fayed presided over a toxic culture of secrecy, intimidation, fear of repercussion and sexual misconduct. Mr Ward, who worked for al-Fayed for 4 years, said he wasn't aware of his criminality and abuse and described it as a shameful period in the business's history. 5 women claim they were raped by Mr al-Fayed, who died last year at the age of 94, with a number of others alleging sexual misconduct. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has told the Israeli military to keep fighting with full force in Lebanon, according to his office. Earlier, the IDF said Israel hit 75 Hezbollah targets overnight in the Bekaa region close to Syria. Netanyahu's statement comes after the UK, US and other allies called for a 21-day ceasefire between Israel and the terror group Hezbollah. Last night, in a joint statement, the 12-strong bloc called for a ceasefire to provide space for diplomacy towards the conclusion of a diplomatic settlement, as well as a ceasefire in Gaza. They said the hostilities were intolerable and presented an unacceptable risk of a broader regional escalation that was neither in the interest of the people of Israel or Lebanon. It comes after Israel's military chief told troops yesterday that extensive airstrikes in Lebanon targeting Hezbollah could pave the way for them to enter enemy territory. Now, a man has appeared in court charged with the murder of a 15-year-old schoolboy. Deshaun Campbell was found with a stab injury in Woolwich on Sunday evening. He died at the scene. 18-year-old Jacob Loswich was not asked to enter any pleas during the hearing today. The district judge remanded Loswich into custody to next appear at the Old Bailey at the end of the month. An amber warning for heavy rain's been issued by the Met Office, warning of further flooding and travel disruption across large parts of the UK. The new alert covers the Midlands and parts of the southwest from 6 p.m. today until 6 a.m. tomorrow. The Met Office warns nearly 3 inches of rain could fall over several hours in the worst affected regions, with rivers continuing to rise after the rain clears. Several yellow weather warnings are already currently in place for large parts of the country until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. I'll be back in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there, welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Yet more wet weather on the way today and overnight as well, with the risk of flooding in places. There will be some brighter interludes out there, mostly towards the far south of the UK and the far north in between. This frontal system causing persistent wet weather and strong winds, the strongest of the winds expected across parts of northern England into North Wales, 50, 60 mile-per-hour wind gusts. And that wind driving spells of heavy and persistent rain, especially into the Pennines, North York Moors, parts of Northern Ireland. Risk of disruption in places by the end of the day. To the south of that, it will be a mild afternoon with some bright spells, but also a lot of showers arriving into southern England, parts of Wales as well. Those showers merge into longer spells of rain through the evening to cause some very wet weather through mid-Wales into the Midlands, parts of East Anglia. Those areas that were badly affected at the weekend could see yet more rain. Rain by this stage easing off across Northern Ireland and Northern England, but continuing in some places. Scotland seeing a brighter day with some sunny spells, but also a few showers coming in on a northerly wind for northern Scotland, and it will feel cold in that northerly. Now into the evening, the rain really intensifies through parts of Wales and the Midlands, and that's why there is a significant risk of flooding in those areas, and it continues for much of the night. It eventually sinks south with the wind strengthening across parts of Wales and into Cornwall by the end of the night, 60-70 mile/hour wind gusts. And then by the end of the night, that rain eventually is pulling away from the south, with the heaviest downpours clearing to the southeast by mid-morning. Brighter skies follow from the north, and it's a much improved picture by the afternoon for many parts of the UK. Having said that, we will have a cold wind arriving from the north across all parts of the UK, and there'll be further showers in one or two places.
The latest GB News travel.
Good morning, hello to you, I'm Jules Buckley. The clockwise M60 straggling Denton Island to Bridlington, junction 24 to 25. A collision means there's at least a lane closed, heavy back towards the M67. Northbound M6 Middlewich 18 to Knutsford 19. A collision there causing queues, a lane closure remains in place. No issues on the M25, no anti-clockwise. It's closed from Brentwood at 28 towards the M11 at junction 27 at the scene of a serious collision. That's causing queues back towards the Dartford crossing. The clockwise side there around junction 28 still has two lanes closed off as well. And if you're heading toward London on the M2 at the turn off of the A2, that's through to junction 1, it's closed there. Big queues back to Chatham and Rochester at junction 3 at the scene of a collision. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Well, welcome back. It is now 12:39. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain with me, Emily Carver, and Tom Harwood has returned in one piece from Liverpool, from the Labour Party conference, so that's
yes,
good.
Here in person, and slightly worse for wear.
Slightly worse for wear. He doesn't look it, though. He looks well,
surviving.
doesn't he? He looks well, not tired at all. But yes, lots of you have been getting in touch about Keir Starmer and the use of this penthouse and the revelation that actually he was using it during the pandemic and delivering national addresses to the nation for people to stay at home when he was actually in someone else's home, which is very interesting, isn't it? June says, what hypocrites Starmer and Rayner are. They hounded Boris over a birthday cake and wallpaper, asking him to resign. She asks, how much power does Lord Ali have? This is not a good relationship. He seems to be buying them. I think that is fair enough to ask. I mean, we found out that so many cabinet ministers, so many Labour MPs as well, have been accepting donations in one way or another. We find out that another Labour MP, Siobhan McDonough, received £1.2 million loan to buy a home for her terminally ill sister. So, which may be a nice thing, but it does beg the question, just how much money is he dishing out?
Well, Brian has a suggestion, or perhaps a prediction. He says, I'm starting to feel a little sorry for Lord Ali. Can you imagine him walking around next year's Labour Party conference with his newspaper bag full of cash, shouting, anyone want a donation? And all the Labour Party politicians running away out of fear that they'd end up on the news, except he then contradicts himself to say, sorry, I was just daydreaming. Of course, they'd take the money.
Well, it does seem that way. How is this one man managing to, fund luxury lifestyle for so many politicians?
It's strange. I suppose the traditional...
Talk about champagne socialism,
the sort of traditional scandal that Labour politicians get into is money scandals, and the traditional scandals the Tories generally get into is sex scandals. But that's the stereotype. I wonder if it's all just playing out.
If you can't afford it, don't have it. I mean, simple as that, no?
Although politicians do need donations. I mean, they need donations in order to campaign. Parties need donations in order to
Hang on. I'm not talking about
enterprises.
political donations, right, to a campaign. I'm talking about the clothes, the apartments, the Taylor Swift tickets, the football matches, the use of this £18 million penthouse, which certainly was not a one-off, to protect his son from potential reporters outside the house. I mean, it does not stack up.
You know, Singapore had a solution to this.
Go on. Pay them more, yeah.
So they pay
How much?
Millions. And they have the lowest corruption index of just about any country in the world. But, of course, that is a bit of a devil's bargain.
Well, in other news, Treasury officials appear to have poured cold water on the government's plans to fund Britain's ailing public services through a tax crackdown on non-DOMs. They've expressed fears that it will actually yield no extra money.
Extraordinary.
Who would have thought it, eh?
Well, Sir Keir Starmer had hoped the policy would raise up to £2.6 billion over the course of this Parliament, but it's now thought it will actually end up costing the Treasury money, as individuals will likely leave the country.
Now, I remember people warning about this. We can now discuss this with the Director of Popular Conservatives, Mark Littleword. Mark, does this surprise you?
Not at all. I mean, I think it could be even worse, Emily, than the Treasury officials are saying. It might not be that it just doesn't raise any money. It might lose us money. We've already got more millionaires fleeing the United Kingdom than any other country in the world, bar China. And if you have a hostile tax regime and a good number of more millionaires flee, it's not just that Keir Starmer won't get that 2.6 billion. It might be that the Treasury brings in less money than it does today. Because typically speaking, although these people are a different tax status to those of us who are British citizens, they employ people, they buy things, all of this goes into the Treasury coffers. So it seems to me that we're in a position in which Britain is basically taxed to the max at the moment. And in many areas, if you try and dial up the rate, or you think you've got some wizard wheeze of squeezing some more money out of wealthy people, you may actually find that the Treasury coffers are barer rather than fuller, and you have less money to spend on public services.
And Mark, if I'm not mistaken, non-DOMs still pay tax on money they earn in the UK. It's just money they earn overseas that isn't taxed due to this arrangement, which makes it sound sort of less unfair than at first the sort of popular understanding of it is. Because I'd reckon if you ask the average Brit what's a non-dom, they'd say, oh, it's someone who lives here but doesn't have to pay any tax at all, which just isn't the case.
Yeah. No, that's right, it isn't the case. So let's just take an example. Supposing Taylor Swift wished to relocate to the United Kingdom but didn't wish to become a British citizen. Then money that she earned in the UK, she would be taxed on, just as we are all taxed on our income. But if she was doing pop concerts in Madrid or New York or Singapore, well, that wouldn't be within the remit of the British taxman. Now, I don't know Taylor Swift. I don't know if she is thinking of moving to the UK. But imagine...
She does like a London boy, I hear.
Crossing her mind. You know, she might be deterred if she knew all of her international revenues would be taxed here. And it would be good for the British economy if people as rich as that did relocate here.
I mean, Mark, is it the same as some of these other policies, ideological policies, in my view? The VAT on private school fees, OK, yes, that got a thunderous applause at the Labour Party conference. Of course it did. But actually, will it save the Treasury any money in the long run? I mean, all of that money that they say they're going to get is going to be, you know, squeezed by having to have more children in the state sector.
You're exactly right, Emily. I mean, the truth of the matter is nobody knows. You can forecast how likely you think it is that parents who have their kids in private schools will pull those children out of private schools and send them to the state sector. If they do, that's a cost on the state. You won't be raising any VAT from them paying their private school fees VAT, and there'll be an extra burden on the state system. Will it level off, or will it end up again costing the government money, that our state schools will become overwhelmed to a greater degree than the VAT raised on private school fees? So I fear that the Labour government sort of believes that there are pots of gold at the end of discoverable rainbows, in which if they can just find a bit more from this billionaire and a bit more from that millionaire, and I don't mean in gifts from Lord Ali, I mean in tax receipts, that they can start funding public services rather better. I think that's very, very unlikely indeed. And we've obviously seen Rachel Reeves argue, I think it was just yesterday, that she wants if you like, other factors to be taken into consideration. Perhaps if she liberalises the planning laws, that might help economic growth. And if we get economic growth, that might help tax receipts. But as far as tax is concerned, we are about the maximum that any government can reasonably squeeze out of the private sector, and efforts to squeeze more, I think, are more likely on balance to be deleterious to the public finances than to swell the public coffers and help our public services.
Well, Mark Littlewood, thanks so much for talking us through that and clarifying what the non-dom rules actually are, which I think gets missed so often in this debate. Mark Littlewood there of Popcorn.
Yeah, people just hear rich person, tax, good. It's a little bit more complicated than that. Anyway, we've got lots more coming up on today's show. Apparently the Welsh are getting more and more nationalist. They don't just want fewer English people over there, but also fewer tourists altogether, at least in one area. More on that next.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
With her novels Persuasion and Northanger Abbey both set in Bath, the city has taken to honouring their author each year with the Jane Austen Festival. Over 3,500 Austen fans flock to the city, many in their Regency finery and many coming from abroad. You can join the throng and follow the author along streets whose buildings look much the same as when she strolled past them over 200 years ago. Dating back to 2001, the festival is the world's largest and longest-running celebration of the Romance writer. Originally created by the Jane Austen Centre in Bath and running over the course of one weekend, 23 years on, it's grown into a 10-day festival with more than 80 events. And to tell us more, I'm delighted to be joined now by author and broadcaster Jenny Trent-Hughes. Jenny, let's have a look at you. You look absolutely splendid. Well, welcome to GB News. Tell me a little bit about what you're wearing.
I'm wearing, well, usually I have a character called the Queen of All Hearts, and I have a fantastic outfit designed by Bath Theatrical. I was on the way up to you this morning. I was so excited I was going to meet you finally, and because of the trains, I didn't get to come. So I had to run back to my boat. I live on a boat, which is why the background is a bit odd, and I'm in a Regency outfit.
Well, look, I'm absolutely delighted that you have put the outfit on for us, because also someone was bringing a dress to you and her train was cancelled as well. So dressing up is obviously a big part of it. Have you any idea how many people dress up in order to participate?
Quite a few thousand.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, it's 12:51. Now, Welsh locals are becoming increasingly sick of so-called disorderly English tourists invading their towns and villages.
Goodness me, those living in the Magaluf of Wales, yes, that's what it's called, the Snowdonian village of Llanberis are also...
Sounded quite French, that.
That did sound French. Shall I do it in Welsh instead? No, I won't. I'll try not to. They're also complaining they've been priced out of their homes.
But they're now reportedly fighting back, with English hikers recently saying they were snubbed in pubs and abused on the streets. Well, joining us now is former member of the Senedd, Caroline Jones. Caroline, this is quite extraordinary. I didn't realise there was this sort of battle going on in Welsh villages, that English tourists were acting disorderly, perhaps getting too drunk, and the Welsh are now fighting back.
Yes, I'd like to say that it is
just a small element of Welsh people that have this attitude. As a person born and bred in Wales, I welcome people into our community. I'm so pleased that people want to see our beautiful country. Because tourism is extremely important to Wales. It actually employs 12% of the Welsh workforce in Wales, you know, and it generates gross £3.8 billion in 2022. You know, those were the statistics. So I'm pleased that people want to come and see our beautiful country. It's for sharing. So this has shocked me that people are making people from England feel unwelcome. Speaking from a personal point of view, I want people here, but there are a small element of people who think that it's diluting the language and diluting our culture for people to come here. And this was apparent when I was a Senedd member, and because Plaid Cymru were upping the rhetoric all the time. If you look back, you know, quite often they'd bring in that they wanted to raise the taxes on properties, you know, and put tourism tax at 5%. So this was, you know, a deterrent for people coming here. Particularly from England, when perhaps you can't afford to go abroad. To nip over the border is you know, puts you in a wonderful place, a different place, but not too far away, not too expensive to bring your children. The fresh air in the North Wales area is absolutely outstanding and beautiful. But I am concerned, and I was concerned in the Senedd, and I did voice my concerns when speaking about this and protecting our tourist industry.
Yeah, Caroline, really, really important to note, because, of course, so many areas of Wales are some of the poorest parts of the UK. Trying to block economic activity is so detrimental. Caroline Jones, that's all we have time for, but thank you so much for joining us, former member of the Senedd.
English tourists aren't wanted anywhere, are they? Tenerife, Magaluf, Marbella, now Wales. We're just persona non grata. Anyway, we're going to take a quick look at the weather. We'll be back in a second.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Yet more wet weather on the way today and overnight as well, with the risk of flooding in places. There will be some brighter interludes out there, mostly towards the far south of the UK and the far north in between. This frontal system causing persistent wet weather and strong winds, the strongest of the winds expected across parts of northern England into North Wales, 50, 60 mile-per-hour wind gusts. And that wind driving spells of heavy and persistent rain, especially into the Pennines, North York Moors, parts of Northern Ireland. Risk of disruption in places by the end of the day. To the south of that, it will be a mild afternoon with some bright spells, but also a lot of showers arriving into southern England, parts of Wales as well. Those showers merge into longer spells of rain through the evening to cause some very wet weather through mid-Wales into the Midlands, parts of East Anglia. Those areas that were badly affected at the weekend could see yet more rain. Rain by this stage easing off across Northern Ireland and Northern England, but continuing in some places. Scotland seeing a brighter day with some sunny spells, but also a few showers coming in on a northerly wind for northern Scotland, and it will feel cold in that northerly. Now, into the evening, the rain really intensifies through parts of Wales and the Midlands, and that's why there is a significant risk of flooding in those areas, and it continues for much of the night. It eventually sinks south, with the wind strengthening across parts of Wales and into Cornwall by the end of the night, 60, 70 mile-per-hour wind gusts. And then by the end of the night, that rain eventually is pulling away from the south, with the heaviest downpours clearing to the southeast by mid-morning. Brighter skies follow from the north, and it's a much improved picture by the afternoon for many parts of the UK. Having said that, we will have a cold wind arriving from the north across all parts of the UK, and there'll be further showers in one or two places.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Desning, good luck.
Headliners Tomorrow's papers tonight, every night from 11 p.m.
Shakespeare play is axed after director refused to remove pro-transgender and pro-Palestine references in new take on A Midsummer Night's Dream. I went to see A Midsummer Night's Dream at Kew Gardens this summer, and it was brilliant, and they didn't touch it. They just left it as it is. And really, when you look at the plot of A Midsummer Night's Dream, it's essentially about sexual assault by today's standards. There's a lot of...
You mean bottom and all that?
Yeah, giving people potions so they'll do things they wouldn't have done otherwise. And I thought,
I was enamoured of an ass.
Yeah, exactly. And but they didn't alter the script, and it was brilliant, and I thought it was really, really good. On the other hand, this director, Steph O'Driscoll, known for her work in London's Royal Court Theatre, had a bit of an issue because she's put some very political stuff into her version. And of course, I would argue for her in that she can do whatever she likes. I'm all for creative freedom, but there comes a point you're like, well, is it still Shakespeare then?
Yeah.
His version definitely wasn't pro-Palestine.
Yeah, I don't remember the pro-Palestine, pro-trans bit.
But the truth is these two things do not go together, trans right and free Palestine. I think the Gazan people are not so gung-ho trans rights stuff.
How dare you, Luke?
So,
Queers for Palestine is a legitimate movement.
But even if it isn't, she's allowed to make something that's incoherent to you. Sometimes you make things that are incoherent to other people.
And you know what? The people out there hear what I say.
Because so the management, the one thing I sympathise with is that they tried to shut it down after the preview. They said you've had all these months, and then they saw one preview and they sort of, whoever was running it went, well, change all that. And they were like, well, no, it's too late. You could have changed it at any point. And then the director walked out and the whole thing just fell apart, right?
Well, you don't know what the real thing is. It might be that this is how they get attention for the play. Now we're paying attention to this, and we're all going to go to this theatre in Manchester.
We're totally going to watch it all together.
So cynical.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Thursday, the 26th of September. I'm Emily Carver.
And I'm Tom Harwood.
Wearing masks and working from home if we can really will help prevent infection.
Starmer's fake COVID home. Not only did the Prime Minister use Lord Arley's £18 million penthouse throughout the election period, it turns out he was using it for party broadcasts through the last Parliament, including for an address to the nation telling us all to work from our homes.
And non-dom gone from London and other cities. Yes, Sir Keir Starmer's grand plan to tax non-doms will bring in no money at all. That's the fear of Treasury officials. If true, schools and hospitals will miss out on £1 billion worth of funding.
No more ceasefire. Benjamin Netanyahu has denied reports he is close to agreeing a 21-day ceasefire with Hezbollah, as he announced insists that fighting will continue against Hamas and Hezbollah until Israel's war goals are achieved.
And the government's bungled its prison release scheme. 5 prisoners are still on the loose after almost 40 people were let out of prison by mistake under Labour's controversial early release scheme, the Ministry of Justice has now admitted.
Scandal, sleaze, donations, incompetence. Wasn't this all supposed to be turned the corner with the general election? Wasn't it supposed to be that the old government was the one that was full of sleaze and incompetently managed programmes and, tax rises that didn't particularly deliver anything? It seems that we've got just more of the same, if you're a cynic.
Yeah, I mean, this is what happens when you adopt a holier-than-thou, very pious attitude towards the government and don't have a clean record book yourself. I mean, what have we learned? We learned that Keir Starmer took the most donations out of any politician, out of any MP since 2019. It was 107,000 for things like spectacles, for wardrobe, for his wife.
Although, Emily, I'm starting to think, if he was really staying in this penthouse for all of these times that hadn't previously been declared, that's going to be a lot more than the 107,000 that was declared.
Yeah, I mean, to rent an £18 million penthouse in central London, even for a week, is going to cost you thousands.
Yeah, and if he was there for, well, lots of the different addresses that he gave, but didn't note that, didn't declare that, then have we seriously undercounted the amount that he should have declared during the last Parliament.
I mean, talk about having your hand out, particularly when you're, well, punishing pensioners in a way by removing their winter fuel payments, removing their welfare, but you're happy to take donations from some Labour peer who happens to be your mate. I mean, it's all just very grubby. It's all just very grubby, and I don't think the government have responded particularly well. Do you?
No, it reminds me of the early COVID sort of denials, just saying, oh, don't worry about it, there's nothing to see here, rather than just saying sorry.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more throughout the hour, but let's get to the news headlines.
Emily, thank you and good afternoon. The top stories. The current managing director of Harrods has apologised and said the business failed our colleagues following sexual misconduct allegations about former boss Mohammed al-Fayed. Michael Ward said in a statement today, it's clear Mr al-Fayed presided over a toxic culture of secrecy, intimidation, fear of repercussion and sexual misconduct. Mr Ward, who worked for al-Fayed for 4 years, said he wasn't aware of his criminality and abuse and described it as a shameful period in the business's history. 5 women claim they were raped by al-Fayed, who died last year at the age of 94, with a number of others alleging sexual misconduct. In other news, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has told the Israeli military to keep fighting with full force in Lebanon. Earlier, the IDF said Israel had hit 75 Hezbollah targets overnight. Netanyahu's statement comes after the UK, the US and other allies called for a 21-day ceasefire between Israel and the terror group Hezbollah. Last night, in a joint statement, the 12-strong bloc called for a ceasefire to provide space for diplomacy towards the conclusion of a diplomatic settlement, as well as a ceasefire in Gaza. They said the hostilities were intolerable and presented an unacceptable risk of a broader regional escalation that was neither in the interest of the people of Israel or Lebanon. It comes after Israel's military chief told troops yesterday that extensive airstrikes in Lebanon targeting Hezbollah could pave the way for them to enter enemy territory. Former chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Elwood, believes a ceasefire is imminent.
I think it will happen in the next 72 hours. It takes some time. This is a very complex operation to get the scale of troop numbers that are required, although I'm sure the IDF, the Israeli Defence Forces, would have been preparing for this for some time.
The family of a teenager who was murdered in Wolverhampton say they're devastated, totally heartbroken and confused. 2 12-year-old boys found guilty of murdering Sean Ceasahai in a random machete attack are set to be sentenced. The killers were convicted in June of murdering the 19-year-old, who was stabbed in the heart and suffered a skull fracture in November last year. They're believed to be the youngest defendants convicted of murder in Britain since Robert Thompson and John Venables, both aged 11, who were found guilty in 1993 of killing 2-year-old James Bulger. The boys, both now 13, face a mandatory juvenile life sentence and are appearing in custody at Nottingham Crown Court today for the start of a 2-day hearing. The sentence is due to be passed tomorrow. A man has appeared in court charged with the murder of a 15-year-old schoolboy. Deshaun Campbell was found with a stab injury in Woolwich on Sunday evening. He died at the scene. 18-year-old Jacob Loswich was not asked to enter any pleas during the hearing today. The district judge remanded Loswich into custody to next appear at the Old Bailey on the 30th of September. A family centre based in Southport, in a Southport building where 3 children died in a knife attack, will not return to the premises. Heartspace, which ran groups for new mothers and families, had been based at the Norwood Business Centre in the town's Hart Street. Founder Jenny Scholes said staff would never forget the events of July 29th and were heartbroken by what had happened. Children had been taking part in a Taylor Swift-themed dance class at the venue when a knife attacker killed 6-year-old B.B. King, 7-year-old Elsie Stankham and 9-year-old Alice De Silva Aguirre. The building is understood to have remained closed ever since. British, US and Australian defence ministers are meeting in London today to discuss plans to build a fleet of nuclear-powered submarines. John Healey's hosting Richard Marles, who's also Anthony Albanese's Deputy Prime Minister, and US Defence Secretary Lloyd James Austin III at this security partnership meeting. If Australia and the UK sign a treaty, the Westminster government's estimated the SSN Orca submarine build project will unlock UK exports into the billions of pounds. The Ministry of Defence says it'll support UK jobs for more than 21,000 people. And the government also confirmed the new treaty will outline the UK's relationship with Australia on submarine cooperation. And an amber warning for heavy rain has been issued by the Met Office, warning of further flooding and travel disruption across large parts of the UK. This new alert covers the Midlands and parts of the southwest from 6 o'clock this evening until 6 a.m. tomorrow. The Met Office warns nearly 3 inches of rain could fall over several hours in the worst affected regions, with rivers continuing to rise after the rain clears. Several yellow weather warnings are already currently in place for large parts of the country until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 9 minutes past 1. Now, Sir Keir Starmer is expected to promise that the UK is returning to responsible global leadership when he addresses the UN Assembly in New York later today.
Yes, this comes against a bit of a bleak backdrop as ever heightening tensions in the Middle East and, of course, the ongoing war in Ukraine.
However, the Prime Minister's use of Lord Arley's £18 million Covent Garden penthouse to film a COVID-era message calling on people to work from home, it threatens to overshadow his appearance on the world stage this evening, as it raises questions as to whether he himself was adhering to the COVID rules.
Well, shall we take a little look at that now infamous clip?
The new variant Omicron is spreading fast, and the argument that we don't know enough about it doesn't stack up. We may not be certain how dangerous it is, but we do know that lives are at risk. At times like this, we must all put the national interest first and play by the rules. Getting jabbed, wearing masks, and working from home if we can really will help prevent infections.
Well, let's go to New York now and speak to GB News political editor Christopher Hope. Firstly, of course, on what's going on in New York at, 8 a.m. for you? The Prime Minister speaking this evening, our time. What will he be talking about?
That's right. Well, he'll be setting out his plans, I think, almost certainly about Ukraine, obviously. The issues in Lebanon, the evacuation of Britons there, the fighting between Hezbollah fighters and Lebanese troops. That is the big concern. But the chatter here is, what will he do today? He may have a brush-by meeting. They call it a brush-by, not a formal meeting, but a meeting with Donald Trump, the US presidential candidate. He's in New York right now. The problem he's got, if that happens for Sir Keir Starmer, is that in Washington there's Kamala Harris. So it might be awkward just to meet Trump and not meet Harris. I think the pair haven't met ever. So it's quite a delicate position here for Sir Keir Starmer. But as things stand, Number 10 won't comment on a reported meeting between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump later today. Yeah, we'll be hearing from Sir Keir Starmer tonight around 10:15 our time in the UK. He's speaking to world leaders all day. Big question about the UK support for Ukraine. Zelensky is due in the White House today with Joe Biden, trying to get this victory plan agreed. Will the UK and US allow Ukraine to use these long-range Storm Shadow missiles to target Russia in Russia? That, of course, lifts the whole tone of the war and will really antagonise Russia even more. And also there's this issue with evacuating Britain from Lebanon. That's what he's keen to talk about. He's got a business breakfast this morning. We'll be there for GB News. He's trying to encourage investment. Big names there, Blackstone, Macquarie, big corporates there. And that comes ahead of quite a big investment conference the government is hosting in coming weeks. Aside from all that, we're seeing interesting chats on the side of this very big week in diplomacy in New York, not least Keir Starmer meeting Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President. That's ahead of a meeting next week. On the agenda, you might expect, could be freedom of movement for the under-30s, which is an issue I think the EU are keen to push, but whether we want to reopen elements in such a big way of the deal we have with the European Union is questionable. We have heard so far from both Number 10 say it's about the EU-UK reset when they met yesterday. And we heard from Sir Keir Starmer, he said, I want to reset our relationship with the EU and make Brexit work for the British people. So that's the diplomacy, but as you've been saying on the programme all afternoon, one big issue for this government, for the Prime Minister, is the acceptance of freebies. I interviewed the PM last night here in New York, and I asked him about an idea that's come from his own backbenchers. Should he give them all back? Here's what he had to say.
A Labour MP for South Shields, Emma Buck, gives her freebies to charity. He gives them away. Why won't you give things you've had for free back to charity or to a good cause?
Well, all that happened is I wanted somewhere safe and quiet for my son to do his GCSE preparation. I needed it to be secure because of the situation we were in. No exchange of money. There's nothing to give away.
There you have Sir Keir Starmer not answering my question. Would he hand back the spectacles, the clothes he'd be given for free? Instead, it seems like he's going to try and style this one out and keep accepting freebies when they come across, when they come, if they have to come up. Or he said he won't accept freebies, but in terms of he'll go to things if he has to meet with companies who want to invest. So he does see a value in doing that kind of thing, and they'll keep declaring it. But the issue you're raising there about this Lord Ali's flat, he obviously was using that for much of the past few years, but then broadcasting that stay-at-home message from that flat with Christmas cards behind him and a Union flag. It does look strange. Now we know it's not his house. Now we're told by Number 10 that he's quite keen not to film in his own property. It's a privacy issue perhaps, but it's another further question about the influence of Lord Ali over this government.
Yes, of course, and then when you add that to the fact that they spent quite a bit of the summer at Lord Ali's penthouse because, in Keir Starmer's words, for his son to be able to revise peacefully for his GCSEs, something doesn't quite add up. But Christopher, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Christopher Hope, our political editor, there in New York for us, where Keir Starmer is too.
Really interesting to see sort of how the Prime Minister is responding to these scandals, trying to talk about the day job, but hallmarks of the last government. Should we talk more now with the political editor at HuffPost UK, Kevin Schofield? Kevin, this is just going on, and I wonder if we're going to get a drip, drip, drip of these donation stories. It sort of reminds me a bit of the drip, drip, drip of COVID party stories we saw with Boris Johnson.
Yeah, I think we're not at that level yet, but you're right. I mean, Labour would have hoped to have drawn a line under this at least maybe during the party conference season. They might have thought that was a reset moment, and that was an opportunity to move on to other things, to get back on the front foot. That was certainly how it was put to me by a senior figure in the government ahead of the conference last week, but that certainly hasn't happened. You're right. I mean, just these stories just keep coming. You've got to take your hat off to Guido Fawkes, I think it was, who first spotted that the video that was filmed during COVID, encouraging people to work from home, wasn't actually filmed in Sir Keir's own house, even though it was made to look like it was his house. And it just, it fails to pass the smell test, really. Ordinary people looking at it, people who well remember lockdown and having to work from home and, only being able to leave the house for an hour's exercise each day, I think it would probably stick in their throat a little bit. So you're coming on top of all the other negative headlines that the Prime Minister has had lately. It's probably the last thing that he really was wanting to happen, as I say, as he tries to get back on the front foot.
And he's just not addressing it head on, is he? He's not admitting that this stuff looks strange. The optics are bad. It looks like he's in politics for himself, accepting all of these donations far and beyond other politicians. I mean, he is well ahead of the pack. There's £107,000 in donations. Now we hear of all this use of this penthouse. He said it was for his son so that he could revise peacefully for exams. Turns out, actually, that Keir Starmer's been using this penthouse quite a bit, including pretending to the public, to the nation, that it's his own home. It's very odd. Apparently the latest excuse for not declaring the use of the penthouse for these videos is that he didn't stay overnight at the property and merely used the premises for a few hours. So it wasn't declared because it didn't meet the minimum £300 threshold. I mean, will that wash, seriously?
No, their story keeps changing all the time, and I think that's what makes it very awkward for the government. It makes the Prime Minister look a little bit shifty, like he can't stick to an agreed line, primarily because there's these different stories coming out all the time. Now, someone, a Labour insider, texted me after his comments yesterday on the GCSE studying for his son, saying every time he opens his mouth, he just makes it worse. And I don't know, there's a suggestion, that maybe he's not listening to the advice that he's receiving from those around him. I think because he thinks it is a family matter, therefore he wants to mould the message himself. But I think maybe someone needs to have a word and say, look, this is not going away. We need to have a serious discussion about how we deal with this and try, as I said before, to get back on the front foot, because it's just overshadowing everything right now. It largely overshadowed the Labour Party conference, and now his first big trip to the UN General Assembly in New York, and he's still having to field these questions rather than talk about the stuff that he wants to talk about. So it is very difficult, and it's causing a lot of frustration, not just in Number 10, I think, but amongst Labour MPs as well, who are just shaking their heads and wishing that the government could actually move on from this non-stop drip feed of bad headlines.
Yeah, it's particularly difficult because the line up until today, really, from the Labour Party had been, look, everything was within the rules, everything was declared in the proper way, we've made all of these declarations, there's nothing to see here. And yet it looks like this could have almost been a secret second home for Keir Starmer, in and out of it all the time, using it, dressing it up as his family home, using it for many different addresses. I'm sure we'll see more stories than just the two, the Queen's death and the COVID address to the nation as well. I'm sure we will see more coming out over the next few days. What matters here, I suppose, is that he can't say this was all declared, because it wasn't.
Well, there's no doubt that journalists will be combing through all the videos that Keir Starmer filmed around that period when he was in opposition to establish whether or not, or where these were filmed and whether or not they were filmed at Lord Ali's apartment, and then cross-checking to see whether it was then declared in the usual way. Now, thus far, there has been no evidence or no suggestion really of any rules being broken, but on a political level, it just looks bad. People just think it looks a little bit strange.
And Kevin, also, just for our democracy, the fact that so many cabinet ministers, including the Prime Minister, appear to be indebted to this one man. It's so strange. They may say, oh, he hasn't asked for anything in return, but as you say, it doesn't pass the sniff test, and many people will be wondering why on earth has this man chosen to be quite so generous to these ministers?
Well, yeah, although he is already a peer, so it's kind of difficult to see what else he could get from the government. It reminds me a little bit of Lord Bamford when he used to shower Boris Johnson with quite a lot of largesse as well in terms of accommodation, wedding facilities, all that type of thing. And again, that was a
come on, he's not going to be doing it just out of the kindness of his heart. And of course there are things that Keir Starmer could offer him. Of course there are, preferences when it comes to policy, for example.
A Downing Street pass, for example.
A Downing Street pass, for example. Of course there are more things.
Well, yeah, the pass issue, it's interesting that you raised that. That was a very strange one. And again, that was another one that really, that the Number 10 operation didn't really answer properly as to why he had this pass straight after the election, why he had it for a relatively short period of time. Those security passes, as you can imagine, they're not just given out, or they shouldn't be just given out willy-nilly, because, it is the seat of power, and it should only be given to people who need to be in there on a regular basis. So that has never been properly answered either. And yet, that is now, we've been talking about this for at least a month, and it is remarkable that Number 10 haven't been able to shut it down. And as you said, there's no doubt, I'm sure, that there'll be more revelations to come, and it's the worst thing that Number 10 need to have right now.
Well, Kevin Schofield of the Huffington Post UK, really appreciate it, your time this afternoon on Good Afternoon Britain. Thanks for joining us.
Just accepting so much from one individual. Very odd. Very odd. Anyway, we've got lots more coming up on today's show. We are going to be bringing you the latest from Israel and Lebanon. Chances of a ceasefire very much diminished. Netanyahu saying, absolutely not. We're going to continue fighting until we reach our war goals. That next.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Prince Harry has got in touch with a lot of people surrounding the royals about a possible return, some sort of easing himself back into what goes on in this country, and tries to repair his image. This has been reported today in the Daily Mail.
Yeah, the major move is being branded as Operation Bring Harry In from the Cold, as he's allegedly growing dissatisfied with advice from American-based image experts.
Let's now speak to Jack Stooks. Now, Jack is a former gardener, senior gardener, top man at Highgrove there. And did you know Harry, Jack?
Yes, yeah, I did. The Harry I knew was always amazing, really good, lovely to be around. I think everybody wanted to be around him, really. He was the sort of life and soul of what we've got to remember is at the time, we knew a book was coming out. We knew various things might come from that. We knew that there was problems with Meghan's family, and there was a lot going on at the time. I think things have, sort of been brushed aside to an extent. Whether or not the book was a mistake, I mean, he might think it was a mistake. He might not think it was a mistake. What we tend to do is we judge him on just the fact that he wrote the book. What we don't think is, why did he write the book? We don't ask the questions as to there was a reason behind him having to have his story known. And maybe, he needed that. Maybe he felt he just needed people to know his side of the story. Hopefully, that family can forgive. I mean, not forget, but be able to sort of move on in a different way.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 26 minutes past 1. Now, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is telling his military to keep fighting with full force as he refuses to respond to these calls for a ceasefire.
Yes, earlier it was believed that a 21-day ceasefire would be implemented between Israel and Hezbollah following joint calls from the United States, the UK and other ally nations.
But now that's all been thrown into doubt, with the Israel Defence Forces also insisting they will continue to fight in Gaza until their goals of the war are achieved.
OK, well, joining us now is former head of the British Army, Lord Richard Dannett. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the show. Earlier, as we said, we were told, or at least it was reported by some, that we could see this 3-week ceasefire. Now we hear from Benjamin Netanyahu and the IDF that is absolutely off the cards.
Well, you're right. I mean, it did look overnight and this morning as if diplomacy was going to have a chance. UN Security Council yesterday issued a very clear statement calling for this 21-day ceasefire. And of course, that's within the wider context and background of the fact that the annual sitting of the UN General Assembly is taking place. Indeed, my understanding is that Netanyahu himself is due to address the General Assembly within the next hour. But as you quite rightly comment, the optimism of breakfast time this morning here in the UK has rather disappeared by lunchtime, with the reports from Netanyahu backed up by his foreign minister that the IDF should keep fighting. So that does appear to put the kibosh, as it were, on the prospects of a ceasefire.
And that's all very interesting because clearly these reports were based upon something, that this ceasefire had been tentatively agreed to or was close to being agreed to. Might this speak to the politics within Israel, that perhaps Netanyahu himself was leaning towards it, but he's got his cabinet to contend with, which includes some, to put it mildly, pretty hardline voices?
Tom, you could be right, but I think there are many forces at play here. One is, I think, the wider context of what the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, had been planning for southern Lebanon to strike from northern Israel. And that goes back to the exploding pages and the exploding walkie-talkies, and the missile strikes, the aircraft strikes of recent time. And it may well be that they were planning a significant ground incursion supported by airstrikes, and the exploding pages and walkie-talkies were all part of discombobulating the Hezbollah command and control system so that they could strike effectively into southern Lebanon. So, and I think certainly the right wing in Israel would very much like that. But of course, it sits in counterpoint to effectively the two failed missions when the Israelis occupied southern Lebanon for some 20 years until about 2000. Until 2020, and then also the other incursion that they made in there. So the history of Israel going in to clear out Hezbollah from southern Lebanon is not good. And I think the other major sort of consideration was that with the UN Security Council meeting last night, with world leaders gathering to address the General Assembly, I think there was a hope that there could be a diplomatic push which might just persuade Netanyahu and the Israelis that a diplomatic solution was better. And I think those two contrasting influences have been playing out. One, a concerted attack, and the second, a concerted diplomatic effort. And it would look as if the right wing in Israel is prevailing at the present moment and is pressing towards a greater military activity.
And what's Hezbollah's strategy here?
Well, Hezbollah and Hamas, I mean, their sworn strategic objectives are the elimination of the State of Israel. And of course, from the Israelis' point of view, that's pretty stark. Before this conflict began on the 7th of October last year, Hezbollah was assessed very reasonably, I don't do it reasonably as in legitimately, but accurately, to have between 130 and 150,000 missiles capable of striking the length and breadth of Israel. Well, that was a huge threat to Israel. And certainly discussions I've had with senior Israelis on this issue, they made it quite clear that if Hezbollah ever was to attack in that way, that their response into Lebanon would be immense, and they would probably also strike at targets in Iran, bearing in mind that Iran is the backer of both Hezbollah and Hamas. And I think this is interesting because at the end of the day, it is Iran that is the paymaster and the principal backers of Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. But Iran itself is in something of a state of flux. A new president recently, a government that's not entirely popular. And I think Iran does not want a major scrap with the West at the present moment. So Iran may be constraining both Hamas and Hezbollah not to push it too hard. So again, with that understanding, this may well be why Netanyahu thinks he'll listen to his right wing and he'll push to try and get what he wants.
And yet, as history tells us, a war on two fronts is never easily won. Lord Richard Dannett, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for talking us through a concerning situation in the Middle East. Former head of the British Army, of course.
Absolutely. Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We've got lots more coming up on today's show. Please do keep your views coming in on Keir Starmer and this latest revelation that he was using the Penthouse back during the COVID era to tell us all to work from home, except he wasn't actually at home. Was he?
No, very, very curious. And of course, this was a government that came into office promising to end the era of sleaze, promising to move beyond what we saw before and turn the page. it doesn't feel like necessarily that page has been turned. You've had unions decrying the Labour Party over their conference in the last 5 days, saying they're marking for austerity 2.0. And for the press, well, it's been story after story of donation gate.
And to make things even worse, their crackdown on non-doms seems to be falling apart at the seams from Treasury officials themselves, saying that actually that crackdown on those rich non-doms isn't actually going to bring in any money. Could even cost the economy.
It all makes for a pretty troubling set of circumstances for the budget next month. We'll be looking into all of that after your headlines.
Tom, Emily, thank you very much and good afternoon. The top stories. The current managing director of Harrods has apologised and said the business failed our colleagues following sexual misconduct allegations about former boss Mohammed al-Fayed. Michael Ward said in a statement today it's clear Mr al-Fayed presided over a toxic culture of secrecy, intimidation, fear of repercussion and sexual misconduct. Mr Ward, who worked for al-Fayed for 4 years, said he was not aware of his criminality and abuse and described it as a shameful period in the business's history. 5 women claim they were raped by Mr al-Fayed, who died last year at the age of 94. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has told the Israeli military to keep fighting with full force in Lebanon, according to his office. Earlier, the IDF said Israel had hit 75 Hezbollah targets overnight. Netanyahu's statement comes after the UK, the US and other allies called for a 21-day ceasefire between Israel and the terror group Hezbollah. Last night, in a joint statement, the 12-strong bloc called for a ceasefire to provide space for diplomacy towards the conclusion of a diplomatic settlement as well as a ceasefire in Gaza. They said the hostilities were intolerable and presented an unacceptable risk of a broader regional escalation that was neither in the interest of the people of Israel or Lebanon. It comes after Israel's military chief told troops yesterday that extensive airstrikes in Lebanon targeting Hezbollah could pave the way for them to enter enemy territory. Former chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Wood, believes a ceasefire is imminent.
I think it will happen in the next 72 hours. It takes some time. This is a very complex operation to get the scale of troop numbers that are required, although I'm sure the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, would have been preparing for this for some time.
And the family of a teenager who was murdered in Wolverhampton say they're devastated, totally heartbroken and confused. 2 12-year-old boys found guilty of murdering Sean Ceesahai in a random machete attack are set to be sentenced. The killers were convicted in June of murdering the 19-year-old who was stabbed in the heart and suffered a skull fracture in November last year. They're believed to be the youngest defendants convicted of murder in Britain since Robert Thompson and John Venables, both aged 11, were found guilty in 1993 of killing two-year-old James Bulger. The boys, both now 13, face a mandatory juvenile life sentence and are appearing in custody at Nottingham Crown Court today for the start of a 2-day hearing. The sentence is due to be passed tomorrow. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. I'll be back with more in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there, welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Yet more wet weather on the way today and overnight as well, with the risk of flooding in places. There will be some brighter interludes out there, mostly towards the far south of the UK and the far north in between. This frontal system causing persistent wet weather and strong winds, the strongest of the winds expected across parts of northern England into North Wales, 50, 60 mile-per-hour wind gusts. And that wind driving spells of heavy and persistent rain, especially into the Pennines, North York Moors, parts of Northern Ireland, risk of disruption in places by the end of the day. To the south of that, it will be a mild afternoon with some bright spells, but also a lot of showers arriving into southern England, parts of Wales as well. Those showers merge into longer spells of rain through the evening to cause some very wet weather through mid Wales into the Midlands, parts of East Anglia, those areas that were badly affected at the weekend could see yet more rain. Rain by this stage easing off across Northern Ireland and Northern England, but continuing in some places. Scotland seeing a brighter day with some sunny spells, but also a few showers coming in on a northerly wind for northern Scotland, and it will feel cold in that northerly. Now into the evening, the rain really intensifies through parts of Wales and the Midlands, and that's why there is a significant risk of flooding in those areas, and it continues for much of the night. It eventually sinks south, with the wind strengthening across parts of Wales and into Cornwall by the end of the night, 60-70 mile/hour wind gusts. And then by the end of the night, that rain eventually is pulling away from the south, with the heaviest downpours clearing to the southeast by mid-morning. Brighter skies follow from the north, and it's a much improved picture by the afternoon for many parts of the UK. Having said that, we will have a cold wind arriving from the north across all parts of the UK, and there'll be further showers in one or two places.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. The southbound M1 struggling away from Sheffield at junction 31. There was a collision there, it's now on the hard shoulder, but it's still looking slow. Staying in Yorkshire, to the west of the county, the westbound M62, an obstruction from Rushworth Moor 22 to 21 at Milne Road means part blocked and slow going. No big problems around Brentwood, junction 28 and the M25. Anti-clockwise there, shut from 28 to 27. Queuing for 2 miles before Romford at 29 for investigation work. That means 2 lanes shut to clockwise before junction 28. That's queuing back towards junction 27. And long queues London bound for the M2. There's emergency barrier repairs ongoing. It's at the turn of Stroud, the A2 junction 1 on the M2, so that's queuing as well. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Well, welcome back to Good Afternoon Britain with me, Emily, and Tom Harwood. Now, Number 10 has admitted to releasing 37 prisoners by mistake, several of whom have still not been returned to jail.
Well, the error has been blamed on problems with the government's controversial early release scheme. The Ministry of Justice claimed to be working in tandem with the police to urgently find 5 of these inmates who are still yet to be returned.
Ah, lovely. Well, that's as Labour is reportedly drawing up plans to introduce a Texas-style prison system. That's with a points-based approach for good conduct. So if you behave yourself or you take part in various courses in prison, you might be let out early. Now, the government will also look to invest in rehab projects in a bid to curb overcrowding.
So, is the government really in control of law and order? Delighted to be joined now by the former Conservative MP and Justice Select Committee member, Sir Bob Neal. Thanks for joining us, Sir Bob. This is, well, it's a mess, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very embarrassing, Tom, for the government, and it's clearly an error which should not have happened. It's worth giving just a little bit of context that I can understand the need to think about early release, because for a raft of reasons, largely because no party of any complexion has really invested enough in the justice system for decades. We were literally running out of prison spaces. And now, when I was chairman of the Justice Committee in the last 2 parliaments, towards the end, Alex Chalk, the then Justice Secretary, had drawn up an early release scheme, which I supported, which had proper safeguards in it. But it's clear that when Labour did this, that important safeguard was missed. And what happened was that some of these people were subject to restraining orders. They were supposed to be exempt from the early release scheme, because often that relates towards threats towards victims or domestic violence and similar matters. And the idea was that they should never be part of an early release scheme. However, what had happened was that the legislation governing restraining orders had changed. And whilst the legislation that was put through by the Labour government covered the current statutory provisions on early release, it didn't cover the 1997 Act, and there were some people still serving who were caught by that. Now, had Alex Chalk been there, he would certainly have spotted that, because he spent 20, 30 years of his life prosecuting serious criminal cases. It shows that the ball was badly dropped, so it's embarrassing for the government. It's embarrassing for the system. We don't know whether it's an error in the drafting or an error in record keeping. Either way, it should not have happened. And it is certainly damaging to the reputation of the justice system for the general public. The broader concern, Tom, is that we are going to have to do something about the numbers. It's a shame that officials in number 10 didn't let Alex Chalk go ahead with his scheme before the elections. I think it would have done much more effectively and efficiently.
Well, yes, I was going to ask. Clearly, the criminal justice system is in a difficult place, very stretched. Our prisons are overcrowded. That's the reason why the government said they had to release so many prisoners early. Why did the Conservatives not prioritise our criminal justice system? They did have years, and they have left the new Labour government with quite a task on their hands.
I think the truth is our government didn't give it the priority it should have done. The previous Blair government didn't either, and it goes back literally. I was practicing as a barrister since the mid-70s, and it was never getting enough funding going back even to then, Emily. So as a society, we've never realised the importance of it. And the particular problem we had was it's what we call a downstream department. It picks up a lot of issues that have gone wrong. People have got into the criminal justice system because of failures in mental health, in education, in the social services, in the care system. So it's picking up a lot of the dross that's been created further up the line, but it didn't have any budgetary protection in the way that education and the health service did. So it had a perfect storm. So that was the problem.
Well, it wasn't just the budget, Sir Bob. It was the fact that the government announced a hospital building programme. Local communities would often object to the idea of having a prison near them, and for some reason the government wanted to pursue popularity rather than taking tough decisions that would actually get these prisons built. To some extent, the new government, well, it's certainly willing to be unpopular when it comes to issues of planning. Perhaps that's actually the approach that will deliver dividends in time.
Well, I've criticised the new government on Tom, as probably many of us have. But I have sympathy with the point that you make. I, as chairman of the committee, towards the end of the last parliament, urged that if we need to build new prisons, and for various reasons we are going to have to, they should be treated as nationally significant infrastructure, which had a different planning process, which prevented that sort of NIMBYism blocking them that we need. Interestingly, the new government does show interest in taking that up, and they're right in that, even though I think they're wrong on very many other things. I'm also interested in Emily's point about the Texas system, and actually I do hope they examine that. You'll remember that back in 2019, our election manifesto as Conservatives pledged a Royal Commission on Criminal Justice. Unfortunately, we didn't follow through on that either. I think if we had done, we might have been able to adopt a much more joined-up approach to the system, and might have saved some of these problems too. But the key thing about the Texas scheme that's worth remembering is that actually is I would term a right-of-centre approach. It was brought in by Rick Perry, a Republican governor of Texas, noted as a fiscal conservative, and also not a softie on law and order at all. But he brought that scheme in because he realised that using prison the way it was in the States, and to a degree the way we use it, without robust alternatives, was not a very cost-effective use of money. And so when he brought that in, with support from his Republican colleagues in the state legislature, he saved money, paid about $2 billion, was able to close prisons, but very importantly, because they had really much tougher community sentences than we've got, what he was able to do was to see reoffending reduced by a third, at least across the state, 50% around Houston, one of the worst areas, and also the number of offences dropping by a similar amount. Now, that's the right approach, because less reoffending means fewer victims of crime, and that's the ultimate
Absolutely,
objective.
and the statistics on reoffending are pretty shocking and depressing in equal measure. Just very quickly, while I've got you, I just wonder if you have a comment on what we've seen in recent days about all these donations coming from Lord Wahid Ali to Keir Starmer and several other cabinet ministers and Labour MPs. What's your thoughts? Is this normal practice?
Well, I never pay. I've always paid for my own glasses myself, and I've always paid for my own suits as well. I do find that pretty extraordinary. We all know that there's some donations in all politics, but it's a pretty bad look, and it's worse, isn't it, when you set yourself up, as the current government has, as being, we are going to be Mr. and Mrs. Squeaky Clean, and then you find all of these things coming up. And what I don't think the British people like, above all things, is they don't like double standards, and this seems to be very much a case of do as I say, but don't do as I do, sort of thing. And I think that's done them an awful lot of damage, and it damages the whole system. I'm surprised and disappointed that they do things which are, I think, pretty blatant to most people, as going beyond what the spirit of when it meets the letter of the rules. Is that really within the spirit? I think a lot of people raise question marks about that.
Well, Bob Neal, former Justice Select Committee Chairman, thanks very much for joining us and talking through those two issues. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We've got lots more coming up on today's show. We've got another exclusive from Charlie Peters, so stay tuned.
The Britain I grew up in was the most peaceful, gentle society that has ever existed. That has been destroyed.
Opinion polls show immigration is the #1 concern to the British public. Are you proud to be British?
Yeah, I'm ever so proud.
My name is Stephen Edgington, and in this documentary, I want to find out how Britain became a nation of immigrants. Immigration, the Truth, available at gbnews.com.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
I'm now joined by a truly inspirational man. He's an endurance runner, Ben Smith. 401 marathons in just 401 days for mental health and well-being. He was spurned on after being bullied as a child, was able to raise a whopping £250,000. I'm pleased to say that he joins me now. Right, so this was a while ago, wasn't it?
Yes.
How long ago was it?
Well, we're coming up to, I think next year, roughly about 10 years since we started it. In 2026 will be 10 years since we finished.
So when did you run the marathons?
So it was between 2015 and 2016, over the course of 401 days, all around the UK.
What kind of madness was that?
Oh, it was an adventure, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, on day one when we started in Bristol, never ever thought that the project would ever become what it became. But over the course of the 401 days, we ran with 13,500 people within 8 miles of everywhere on the British mainland, from Land's End to John O'Groats. So,
and that was the journey from Land's End to John O'Groats?
Yeah. We covered so many different communities around the UK because I suppose the reason why I was doing it was to raise so much money for 2 anti-bullying charities that we wanted to include people in that. And yeah, I got to run in some amazing places.
I bet you did. What would you say is a beautiful place? I mean, the whole country, I love this country, but there are some outstanding, beautiful areas around. What would you say?
Oh, definitely.
Where's the best place that you run?
Well, I think I've got a few, but I think I would say probably the Highlands of Scotland.
I knew you would say somewhere like
that. Yeah, just the kind of vastness of it, the dramaticness of it. I remember running up and down one of the paths in the Highlands near Glencoe and coming face to face with a wild stag. So it was quite scary.
What did it do?
It did nothing. It did absolutely nothing. It was quite used to people because of the path.
What are you doing here? This is my house.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is now 1:51, and 2 Rotherham child abuse victims were left out of court for the sentencing of their rapist. GB News can reveal today.
The National Crime Agency has apologised for an error after survivors were not brought into that courtroom for the sentencing of Neil King, who received 21 years imprisonment for 17 sexual offences against 2 girls.
Well, our national reporter Charlie Peters joins us now with this exclusive. Charlie, please tell us.
Well, today a judge is putting on a special additional hearing for those 2 survivors of that appalling abuse to appear in court after they were left out by the National Crime Agency officer in charge of ensuring they were inside the courtroom during that sentencing last week. Now, the NCA has said that it was an officer error that led to those survivors being left out. As I understand it, there was a change in personnel which created some confusion. But for those survivors, they've waited 16 years to finally face down their abuser, to see him being put away for 21 years imprisonment after 17 offences. This is a core and serious moment for those survivors to see that crucial moment of justice being delivered. So as I understand it, it was very distressing for them to have not been in the court as it happened. A human error, as I said, and as the NCA put it, but still very distressing indeed for those involved. Now, Maggie Oliver, the tireless child abuse campaigner who runs a foundation that works with many survivors, told me today that it's difficult for survivors to get over moments like this when they're let down by the system. And she said that all too often this process is about procedure and systems, and the victims are not at the heart of it. And that's what's happened at Sheffield Crown Court. And it comes just a couple of weeks after we revealed another story from Sheffield Crown Court where a victim impact statement was censored by a judge, a woman who'd waited 2 decades to say what she wanted to say to her abusers, to face them down as they were jailed for more than 100 years. That was censored in the same court 2 weeks ago. So a couple of bad stories for the Operation Stovewood National Crime Agency team who've achieved great success in tackling child abuse, but have had a couple of bad headlines recently.
Is this Neil King who was sentenced, is he linked to the wider grooming gang scandal in Rotherham?
So he's under the Operation Stovewood investigation. So he's one of the men that the National Crime Agency has uncovered as abusers from that period. The majority of his abuse took place 16 years ago. He also operated in tandem with his then girlfriend. She was also arrested and charged, but died before the trial started. But Neil King will serve 21 years imprisonment for those 17 offences. We don't know the nature of what happened this morning at the courts, with the judge sitting, agreeing to address those victims in court today, to apologise to them. The NCA told me this morning that they've also apologised to both victims, and they'll receive a further apology in writing. They also thanked them for their bravery, saying that their testimony, both before and in the trial, was vital to achieving these convictions. But in the vital moment of justice, they weren't there.
Well, Charlie, thank you so much for bringing us that exclusive story. More with you later, of course. But don't go anywhere. Much more on today's show, including donation scandals. Let's look at the weather first.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Yet more wet weather on the way today and overnight as well, with the risk of flooding in places. There will be some brighter interludes out there, mostly towards the far south of the UK and the far north in between. This frontal system causing persistent wet weather and strong winds. The strongest of the winds expected across parts of northern England into North Wales, 50, 60 mile-per-hour wind gusts. And that wind driving spells of heavy and persistent rain, especially into the Pennines, North York Moors, parts of Northern Ireland. Risk of disruption in places by the end of the day. To the south of that, it will be a mild afternoon with some bright spells, but also a lot of showers arriving into southern England, parts of Wales as well. Those showers merge into longer spells of rain through the evening to cause some very wet weather through mid-Wales into the Midlands, parts of East Anglia. Those areas that were badly affected at the weekend could see yet more rain. Rain by this stage easing off across Northern Ireland and Northern England, but continuing in some places. Scotland seeing a brighter day with some sunny spells, but also a few showers coming in on a northerly wind for northern Scotland, and it will feel cold in that northerly. Now, into the evening, the rain really intensifies through parts of Wales and the Midlands, and that's why there is a significant risk of flooding in those areas, and it continues for much of the night. It eventually sinks south, with the wind strengthening across parts of Wales and into Cornwall by the end of the night, 60, 70 mile-per-hour wind gusts. And then by the end of the night, that rain eventually is pulling away from the south, with the heaviest downpours clearing to the southeast by mid-morning. Brighter skies follow from the north, and it's a much improved picture by the afternoon for many parts of the UK. Having said that, we will have a cold wind arriving from the north across all parts of the UK, and there'll be further showers in 1 or 2 places.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss My Big Opinion, Mark Meets, and My Take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Thursday, the 26th of September. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
Wearing masks and working from home if we can really will help prevent infection.
Starmer's fake COVID home. Not only did the Prime Minister use Lord Arley's £18 million penthouse throughout the election period, turns out he was using it for party broadcasts through the last Parliament too, including for an address telling the nation to work from home.
OK. Well, non-dom gone from London and other cities. Yes, Sir Keir Starmer's grand plan to tax non-doms will bring in no money at all. That's the fear of Treasury officials. If this is true, schools and hospitals are going to miss out on £1 billion of funding that they were promised.
No more ceasefire. Benjamin Netanyahu has denied reports that he's close to agreeing a 21-day ceasefire with Hezbollah, as he insists that fighting will continue against both Hamas and Hezbollah until Israel's war goals are achieved.
And the government's bungled prison release scheme gets worse. 5 prisoners are still on the loose after almost 40 people were let out of prison by mistake. This under Labour's controversial early release scheme, the Ministry of Justice has admitted.
There is a strange air around this new government. That someone was saying that this was like, it felt it was sort of year 5 of a 5-year-long government. That sort of all of these scandals that had built up over time, the mishaps that inevitably take place after a long time in government. Well, it's all happening in month 3.
Do you know what's quite interesting? Is that The Guardian, who most people would assume is a Labour backing paper, or at least leaning in that direction, quite a few negative articles coming out, particularly one here. I'm picking up bad vibes. Voters unimpressed by Labour after 3 months in power. Widespread opposition to winter fuel payments cuts. Some are perplexed by the furore over freebies for ministers. But they're citing several people they've been talking to who are saying things like, Boris Johnson was such a numpty. Have we got another numpty now? These are the sort of questions that people are asking at the Labour conference, people who backed Labour to become the new government. There does seem to be a sense of disappointment. He needs to get a grip, doesn't he, Keir Starmer?
Yeah, and it was actually The Guardian that reported on this issue with non-dom taxation. Of course, it's a very popular thing to say you're going to tax very rich people, but if the Treasury mandarins run the numbers and say, actually, you're going to get less money for this because high net worth individuals, super high net worth individuals, can go and choose to live in America instead, well, what's the benefit here beyond sort of satisfaction? I mean,
It's ideology. That's what it is. It's ideology. You get a huge, thunderous round of applause at things like Labour Party conference if you say tax the rich, if you say slap VAT on private school fees. All of these left-wing populist ideas, they get you a thunderous round of applause, but then you do the figures, you speak to people who actually know how these things work, and they say, hang on, it's not going to work. You're not going to get the money you want.
But if your goal is equality, rather than, you know, raising funds or whatever, if you really believe in equality, i.e. closing the gap, you can, of course, close that gap not by lifting people up, you can close it by cutting the top people down. I mean, then we're a poorer country, but we're a more equal country. I mean, some people have that ideology. They genuinely think it's a better country to be poorer, but more equal.
Yeah, as long as it's rubbish for everyone. Then it's great.
Equally rubbish,
Equally
right?
rubbish.
Everyone's
Equally rubbish. I guess you could say that about the NHS in some respects. But it's interesting, isn't it, that characters like Andy Haldane, a former chief economist at the Bank of England, are now going on the media rounds saying, what is this doing to sentiment about UK PLC, this non-dom crackdown? Does it make it more or less likely people will park their money, set up businesses here and generate growth? There are real concerns that consumer confidence is down, business investment confidence is down, foreign investment could be down, jobs could be down, growth could be down, revenues could be down because of these sort of slapdash policies.
Well, much more to come on a very cheery show today.
Sorry about that, yes.
Get involved, send your views to gbnews.com/your say. But now it's your news headlines.
Tom, Emily, thank you very much and good afternoon. The top stories. The current managing director of Harrods has apologised and said the business failed our colleagues following sexual misconduct allegations about the former boss Mohammed al-Fayed. Michael Ward said in a statement today, it's clear Mr al-Fayed presided over a toxic culture of secrecy, intimidation, fear of repercussion and sexual misconduct. Mr Ward, who worked for al-Fayed for 4 years, said he was not aware of his criminality and abuse and described it as a shameful period in the business's history. 5 women claimed they were raped by Mr al-Fayed, who died last year at the age of 94, with a number of others alleging sexual misconduct. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has told the Israeli military to keep fighting with full force in Lebanon. Earlier, the IDF said Israel hit 75 Hezbollah targets overnight. Netanyahu's statement comes after the UK, the US and other allies called for a 21-day ceasefire between Israel and the terror group Hezbollah. Last night, in a joint statement, the 12-strong bloc called for a ceasefire to provide space for diplomacy towards the conclusion of a diplomatic settlement, as well as a ceasefire in Gaza. They said the hostilities were intolerable and presented an unacceptable risk of a broader regional escalation that was neither in the interest of the people of Israel or Lebanon. It comes after Israel's military chief told troops yesterday that extensive airstrikes in Lebanon targeting Hezbollah could pave the way for them to enter enemy territory. Former chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Elwood, believes the ceasefire is imminent.
I think it will happen in the next 72 hours. It takes some time. This is a very complex operation to get the scale of troop numbers that are required, although I'm sure the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, would have been preparing for this for some time.
The family of a teenager who was murdered in Wolverhampton say they're devastated, totally heartbroken and confused. They say they're haunted by thoughts of how scared he must have been when he was killed. 2 12-year-old boys found guilty of murdering Sean C. Sahai in a random machete attack are set to be sentenced. The killers were convicted in June of murdering the 19-year-old, who was stabbed in the heart and suffered a skull fracture in November last year. They're believed to be the youngest defendants convicted of murder in Britain since Robert Thompson and John Venables, both aged 11, were found guilty in 1993 of killing 2-year-old James Bulger. The boys, both now 13, face a mandatory juvenile life sentence and are appearing in court today in custody for the start of a 2-day hearing. The sentence is due to be passed tomorrow. A man has appeared in court charged with the murder of a 15-year-old schoolboy. Deshaun Campbell was found with a stab injury in Woolwich on Sunday evening. He died at the scene. 18-year-old Jacob Loswich was not asked to enter any pleas during the hearing today. The district judge remanded Loswich into custody to next appear at the Old Bailey on the 30th of September. In other news, British, US and Australian defence ministers are meeting in London today to discuss plans to build a fleet of nuclear-powered submarines. John Healey is hosting Richard Marles, who's also Anthony Albanese's Deputy Prime Minister, and US Defence Secretary Lloyd James Austin III at this security partnership meeting. If Australia and the UK sign a treaty, the Westminster government's estimated the SSN AUKUS submarine build project would unlock UK exports into the billions of pounds. The Ministry of Defence says it'll also support UK jobs for more than 21,000 people. And the government also confirmed the new treaty will outline the UK's relationship with Australia on submarine cooperation. An amber weather warning for heavy rain has been issued by the Met Office, warning of further flooding and travel disruption across large parts of the UK. The new alert covers the Midlands and parts of the southwest from 6 o'clock this evening until 6 a.m. tomorrow. The Met Office warns nearly 3 inches of rain could fall over several hours in the worst affected regions, with rivers continuing to rise after the rain clears. Several yellow weather warnings are already currently in place for large parts of the country until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And the Hollywood icon Dame Joan Collins has spoken to GBNews for the first time. Sitting down with Andrew Pearce, she slammed the rise of the so-called woke culture.
Consider myself to be feminine and a feminist, and why should we be called female actors? I find it demeaning. I think it's gone out of control. Really, you can't say anything, people get offended. We've lost our British sense of humour.
And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez, more from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 10 minutes past 2. Now, Sir Keir Starmer is expected to promise that the UK is returning to responsible global leadership when he addresses the UN General Assembly in New York later today.
Did it used to be irresponsible global leadership?
I suppose that's the implication.
Well, it comes against a bleak backdrop of ever-heightening tensions in the Middle East and the ongoing war in Ukraine.
However, the Labour leader's use of Lord Arley's £18 million Covent Garden penthouse to film a COVID-era message calling on people to work from home threatens to overshadow his appearance on the world stage, at least at home, as it raises questions as to whether he himself was adhering to those COVID rules.
Gosh, I do not miss those video messages that we received from our great leaders, do you? During, oh goodness me, sitting behind their desk at home. Although not in this case. Should we go to New York now and speak to GB News political editor Christopher Hope? Christopher, by the sounds of it, it's going to be a very busy day for the Prime Minister. He's got lots on his plate. Any update on whether he's going to have this meeting with Donald Trump?
No. Hi, Emily. Hi, Tom, from New York City. This lunchtime for you. It's still early in the morning here. No word yet. It's probably going to be a brush by, which in the world of diplomacy means they kind of aren't meant to meet, then they come across each other in New York somehow. A Bloomberg website is reporting it from Trump's end. This meeting will happen. No confirmation yet from the UK. We'll wait and see. And if that happens, it'll be quite a moment. It's difficult diplomatically for that meeting, maybe for number 10, because Kamala Harris is in Washington, not here. She has never met with Sir Keir Starmer, so if he meets with Trump and not Harris ahead of the election in early November, that may look a bit difficult. So there's a trade-off to be made there. Of course, Zelensky and others may want Starmer to meet with Trump because Trump is an issue going forward. If he wins the election in early November, becomes the next president of the United States, there's a rumour and strong views that he may try and push Ukraine towards seeking a peace deal with Russia, which is not what Ukraine wants. So there's a trade-off between meeting with Trump, because it might help Zelensky, but also may slightly embarrass the Kamala Harris camp. As things stand, though, Emily and Tom, no word yet on that meeting.
No, it's interesting, though, Chris. There's lots else going on today, including this investment lunch that you've been talking about. But I wanted to raise this issue with you. The Prime Minister today has tweeted this out on X. I wonder if we can get the picture up for us. He's boasting about new investment, he says. New. We have secured investment to create one of the largest AI data centres in Europe, based in the northeast of England. It sounds amazing. But Chris, several people have pointed out that actually, if we can go to the next picture here, this was all announced by Northumberland County Council 3 months ago, over 3 months ago, sorry, back in April, under the last government. Is the government just re-announcing a deal that was already done by the previous administration?
Yes, so Tom, well spotted. The answer from number 10 is yes and no, because this today is the first time that Blackstone, this big US company, has committed to this investment. Before that, it was hoped for, planned for. So this is the first time we're getting ink signed on the dotted line by Blackstone. And number 10 tell us that these kind of big deals do take time to come together, and they are when they're of this scale, they have to work and talk to other partners like Northumberland Council ahead of time before it can be agreed. So what's happened is this has now formally been agreed by Blackstone, this big investment company, for the first time, and things take a while to come to fruition. But that's right, so Keir Starmer is right now having a business breakfast with people like Macquarie, big investors. As we do know from this conference speech we heard this week from the Prime Minister, he thinks that growth is of paramount importance, and it's all about getting this economy growing. There's due to be a big investment summit coming up, hosted by Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, and so that's the whole context of why they're doing these meetings. But aside from that, there's all sorts of diplomacy happening here, away from the Trump possible meeting. Ursula von der Leyen, the European Union President, she met yesterday with Keir Starmer, and that's ahead of a meeting next week, which is really important. So while we're watching the 4 candidates for the Tory leadership battle it out in their party conference, don't ignore Brussels, because right there could be some movement on whether we do a deal on under 30s from freedom of movement, which is something which the European Union is pressing for. Away from that, in his speech tonight, we'll hear from Keir Starmer. He'll be saying around 10:15 tonight, UK time, hopefully on GBNews 2, about he wants to get Britons out of Lebanon, and also they are concerned to try and help get a big package deal agreed for Ukraine to take on Russia. But he flies back to London tomorrow with these concerns about freebies hanging over him, and particularly the influence of Labour peer Lord Ali. He's not backing down from that. He thinks you have to take freebies, go to football matches and the like, if you're going to meet people and do deals for the UK. But a question I asked him last night for GB News is, why not give it all back? Why not give this stuff back to where it came from, or to charities, as a Labour MP has been doing herself? And here's what he had to say.
A Labour MP for South Shields, Emma Buck, gives her freebies to charity. He gives them away. Why won't you give things you've had for free back to charity or to a good cause?
Well, all that happened is I wanted somewhere safe and quiet for my son to do his GCSE preparation. I needed it to be secure because of the situation we were in. No exchange of money. There's nothing to give away.
So Keir Starmer there not answering the question, would he give back the suit, the glasses, everything else to charity? Instead, he's doubling down. He sees a reason to take these freebies. They help him understand and almost woo investors to this country. But I don't think the issue of Lord Ali is gone away anytime soon.
I do wonder whether he'll continue to use the £18 million penthouse for various activities, or whether he'll decide that better not anymore. Christopher Hope, thank you very much indeed, GB News political editor. Interesting, that Blackstone story, that investment in that AI data centre. Well, at least the government can celebrate that it hasn't been dumped, that Blackstone haven't dumped the idea, even if they didn't kick it off.
No, it's funny. The use of the word from the council back in April was agreed. The use of the word from the Prime Minister was secured.
Oh, yes.
So OK, this agreed deal has now been secured. OK, fine, good, but don't try and make it sound like an announcement.
Well, it hasn't been dumped, and that is a good thing for Britain. We need more AI data centres.
We certainly do.
You tell me we do it. Should we get some more reaction to all of the politics with political correspondent at The Spectator, James Heal? James, thank you very much indeed for coming on the show this afternoon. This penthouse is causing quite the stir, isn't it, really? I mean, yesterday we had £20,000 of accommodation, the use of this penthouse declared. Well, we found it in the declaration of Keir Starmer's. Today we find out that actually he's been using it for other reasons as well, during COVID, for example, for his broadcasts to the nation. It's all rather odd, James.
Yeah, well, I think it shows once more just how systemic the role was that Lord Ali has been playing for Labour over not just the past 5 years of Keir Starmer's leadership, but a much longer period as well. Obviously, there's the questions involving the £18 million flat, which was used for, I think, a 7-week period earlier this year. Of course, only half of that period or so was the period in which GCSEs were being done. So questions of which, what was it kind of being used for? We understand that the flat was where Keir Starmer watched the exit poll come in on the evening of July the 4th. And obviously, clearly, Lord Ali has had a very long-term relationship with Keir Starmer if he was using his flat during COVID to film these messages. So I think there's questions, all the newspapers today seem to lead on that. And it shows that for all the attempts to kind of move Labour off this story during the Labour conference speech, for all the talk potentially of a quiet reset, now we're back to square one and facing more questions about the role that this multimillionaire played for the Labour leader.
Yes, very curious, and particularly, these stories do most damage when they're not a sort of one-day done-and-gone story, when they're a drip, drip, drip sort of story. We've seen this with scandals in the past, but when they run and run and the government isn't able to shut them down, they can be deeply politically damaging.
They certainly can, and I think that this Labour government has chosen not to have much in the way of a kind of media briefing operation. They want to just say a news when they've got news. I think they want to take some of the sting out of the media cycle. But of course, in that absence, these stories then do continue to run and run. As you say, Tom, this is now, I think, about a sort of month-old story. This story has been dominating since July and late July, and I think that what it shows really is that Labour have not got a grip on it, not been able to put the questions to bed, and I think there's been an absence of anything kind of in a positive narrative to try and take that place. So I think perhaps it's a sort of cautionary tale, as we're still in the first 100 days of this Labour government, that they might want to look at how they're operating things and responding to inquiries.
I mean, James, it's not just a concern that Lord Wahid Ali is donating so much to Keir Starmer. It's also just the number of Labour politicians that he's donating to. He's extremely generous. He seems to be absolutely close buds with absolutely everyone in the cabinet, and also other Labour MPs. Siobhan McDonough, £1.2 million loan from Lord Ali to buy a house for her terminally ill sister. That, on the face of it, appears to be a kind thing to do. But the question is just, you know, why is this particular man providing so much in the way of assistance to all of these senior Labour politicians?
So I think if you look at Lord Wahid Ali's career, you know, he's always been an opponent of the left within the Labour Party. 40 years or so, he talks fondly, if you speak to friends of his, about you know, sort of battling the left in the kind of faction as it was militant back then in the 1980s. And so he's always someone who's been a moderate on the Labour wing. I think it's two things. I think one of which is a genuine belief in Labour. Labour, of course, has done quite well with him, of course, and done a lot for him in terms of giving him that peerage back in 1998 when he was one of the first so-called Tony's cronies to go to the Lords. The second thing is, I think, an attraction to the epicentre of power. This is someone who loves the fact that he's donated to 8 members of the cabinet, 7 former Labour leadership contenders. And I think it shows really that he's someone who is not going to let the controversies of the past deter him from investing in the party he's bankrolled for 25 years. He really loves Labour, and clearly there are very few millionaires, given the way the economy's going, at the current time, who's going to keep financing the party.
Yeah, I suppose it does make sense. If he's their only rich friend, then sort of they all have to lean upon him.
It was sponging off this one man. I can't get over it. I can't understand it. I don't know why they're all accepting these lavish gifts, this ridiculous accommodation in Covent Garden.
But then, James, there was the issue that he was given a pass to Downing Street, an incredibly exclusive pass. I think a lot of people think that, oh, he's in the House of Lords, of course he can walk into Downing Street. I mean, that's not how it works. Not even senior members of the cabinet have that level of access.
Yeah, and actually, if you talk to some parliamentarians, they're sort of a bit like, you know, MPs don't get that, as one MP said to me a bit sniffly. So I think that there is a sense about, you know, this was definitely someone who was part of the team. And actually, you know, you talk to people who in Keir Starmer's number 10, they didn't think it was weird he was walking around because he was so used to them during the election. He was the person in charge of fundraising, calling up his wealthy contacts and friends, tapping high net worth individuals for the outreach. And he played a role at this Labour conference, helping to coordinate donors for their £3,000 a day business day. So he's someone who who was and remains a key part of the Starmer operation. I don't think they're going to drop him anytime soon. And the key thing, of course, is about, how many other donors did get a pass to Downing Street. And obviously Downing Street, under various different administrations, is always very cagey to say who has a pass and what. But certainly, just to be clear, it is very much not the norm for a Labour peer to have a number 10 pass to Downing Street.
No, I have to say that I spoke to someone at the conference who attended the business day who was really rather underwhelmed by it. Very expensive tickets, and all it was a bunch of panel discussions, not the sort of access that this particular businessman I spoke to was hoping for. So maybe Wahid Ali's been a bit distracted.
Also, James, forgive me for putting you on the spot. Are you looking forward to Michael Gove being your editor at The Spectator?
I'm sure he'll be a very successful editor. He, of course, was a very successful journalist. And, The Spectator's had a wonderful 15 years with Fraser Nelson as editor. So I'm excited to see what he does next as well. So brave good new era at The Spectator.
The only way is up. Thank you very much indeed. James Heal, political correspondent at The Spectator. Good stuff.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain. Lots more to come on GB News, including new news on Mohammed al-Fayed. We'll tell you what after the break.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
When I knew that I was doing this segment this week, I feel like this week was a real homework task for me because I'll be honest, I haven't been around Scottish food much in my life, but I obviously know all the obvious. And I thought I'd bring in a selection of some of, I guess, the sort of the quintessential culinary delights of the North. I mean, we have in front of us haggis.
I think we should begin with some haggis.
So, Michael, I've never eaten haggis before. This is going to be the first time.
Well, have you eaten anything like haggis before? Have you eaten anything that is made from the intestines of an animal?
I mean, I've had things like chopped liver and, a bit of offal here and there.
Well, there we are. I mean, I got a great surprise. I was holding a great... When I was in government, I was holding a great party in Scotland, and I had a lot of Spanish visitors, and I was offering them haggis, and I thought that they would be astonished by haggis and maybe repelled. But when they ate it, they said, oh, no, this is morcilla. So, there is an equivalent in Spain.
Absolutely.
So if I recall, and you've probably been mugging it up, which I have not, but haggis is made within the stomach of a sheep.
Yes.
And you take the heart and the lungs and some other part of the sheep and you mash it up.
With onions, oatmeal, suet.
Yes.
And it's stuffed into the sheep's stomach. But a lot of the haggis you get these days, especially sort of the slightly cheaper varieties in supermarkets, it's usually an artificial casing. Oh. You know what? This is actually quite nice.
I think it's absolutely heavenly. And
it's very savoury.
To me, it's two things. Yes, to me, it's two things. It's both the taste and the texture. You quite rightly refer to the oatmeal going in there. So it's got this crunchy, granular sort of texture. Marvellous.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
The king of breakfast TV is back. That's right, Britain's favourite TV host, Eamon Holmes, returns to Britain's hottest breakfast programme. Breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 27 minutes past 2. Now, a development on the Mohammed al-Fayed scandal. The current managing director of Harrods is now apologising for failing his colleagues after sexual misconduct allegations to do with that former owner, Mohammed al-Fayed.
Yes, the now boss, Michael Ward, said in a statement that it is clear Mr al-Fayed presided over a toxic culture of secrecy, intimidation, fear of repercussion and sexual misconduct.
Well, joining us is our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, to react to this news. Because clearly, Cameron, Harrods has to do some pretty vital, clear-up public relations work.
Well, it would appear so, Tom. Of course, there are now a number of allegations from separate women related to the former Harrods boss, Mohammed al-Fayed. And actually, this afternoon, we've had further statements first from the Metropolitan Police, who have, following all of these allegations, put out a public plea for further potential victims or survivors, as they are also referring them to come forward if they believe they were sexually abused by Mohammed al-Fayed. The police have also confirmed to the Metropolitan Police that they have contacted the lawyers of those women who have already come forward and have given media interviews and taken part in that original BBC documentary and investigation, and assure the public that any victim or alleged victim will be supported by specially trained officers who deal with sexual abuse. Now, clearly, Mohammed al-Fayed is dead. He died last year at the age of 94, so he is not criminally liable. But the police have also confirmed this afternoon that they are exploring options to potentially look at some of Mohammed al-Fayed's associates to see if they could potentially allegedly be criminally liable. The commander, Stephen Clayman, he says it is vital that any victim that has a voice, and he also suggests that any of these allegations will be taken extremely seriously by the Metropolitan Police. Now, just to recap a little bit, the Crown Prosecution Service during Mohammed al-Fayed's lifetime failed to prosecute him twice. The CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, said that the Metropolitan Police presented them with evidence, once for an alleged indecent assault of a 15-year-old girl in 2008, as well as an alleged rape by a separate alleged victim in 2013, but no further action was taken. And as you said in your introduction there, Tom and Emily, the current Harrods director has also released a statement saying that we, as in Harrods, failed our colleagues. He also says, Michael Ward, that al-Fayed presided over a toxic culture of secrecy, intimidation, fear of repercussion and sexual misconduct. And he also says that although he personally worked for Mr. Fayed for 4 years, he was not aware of his criminality and abuse, and described it as a shameful period in the business's history. Meanwhile, the General Medical Council, they have also confirmed that they are investigating. That's after there are allegations that 2 private doctors working for Mohammed al-Fayed conducted intrusive and unnecessary sexual health screenings on al-Fayed's alleged victims. Now, although al-Fayed is dead, it does appear there are several allegations against some of his associates, and they could have something to answer for.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed for bringing us that breaking news. Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent. We'll speak to you in a little bit, I'm sure.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more coming up in today's show, including a concerning development for one of the most exciting sectors and new innovations around the world. Yes, the United States is enjoying new AI systems where you can talk in a conversation to your phone, where Facebook and Meta are releasing new AI systems. Guess what? It's all blocked in Europe. It's all blocked in the UK as well. Is this to do with legacy EU regulation?
Good afternoon. The top stories. As you've just been hearing, the Metropolitan Police are appealing for any potential victims, survivors of alleged sexual abuse by Mohammed al-Fayed to come forward so they can investigate. The Met Police said in a statement that they must ensure every victim survivor has the confidence to speak to the force about the former Harrods owner. That, says the current managing director of Harrods, apologised earlier and said the business failed our colleagues following sexual misconduct allegations about the former boss, al-Fayed. Michael Ward said in a statement that it's clear al-Fayed presided over a toxic culture of secrecy, intimidation and fear of repercussion. 5 women claim they were raped by Mr al-Fayed, who died last year at the age of 94, with a number of others alleging sexual misconduct. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has told the Israeli military to keep fighting with full force in Lebanon. Earlier, the IDF said Israel had hit 75 Hezbollah targets overnight. Netanyahu's statement comes after the UK, the US and other allies called for a 21-day ceasefire between Israel and the terror group Hezbollah. Last night, in a joint statement, The bloc called for a ceasefire to provide space for diplomacy towards the conclusion of a diplomatic settlement, as well as a ceasefire in Gaza. They said the hostilities were intolerable and presented an unacceptable risk of a broader regional escalation that was neither in the interest of the people of Israel or Lebanon. The family of a teenager who was murdered in Wolverhampton say they're devastated, totally heartbroken and confused. They say they're haunted by thoughts of how scared he must have been when he was killed. 2 12-year-old boys found guilty of murdering Sean Zisahai in a random machete attack are set to be sentenced. The killers were convicted in June of murdering the 19-year-old, who was stabbed in the heart and suffered a skull fracture in November last year. They're believed to be the youngest defendants convicted of murder in Britain, since Robert Thompson and John Venables, both aged 11, were found guilty in 1993 of killing 2-year-old James Bulger. The boys, now 13, face a mandatory juvenile life sentence and are appearing in court today in custody for the start of a 2-day hearing. The sentence is due to be passed tomorrow. And an amber warning for heavy rain has been issued by the Met Office, warning of further flooding and travel disruption across large parts of the UK. The new alert covers the Midlands and parts of the southwest from 6 o'clock tonight until 6 a.m. tomorrow. The Met Office warns nearly 3 inches of rain could fall over several hours in the worst affected regions, with rivers continuing to rise after the rain clears. Several yellow alerts are already in place for large parts of the country until 9 a.m. tomorrow. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. There's more news in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there, welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Yet more wet weather on the way today and overnight as well, with the risk of flooding in places. There will be some brighter interludes out there, mostly towards the far south of the UK and the far north in between. This frontal system causing persistent wet weather and strong winds, the strongest of the winds expected across parts of northern England into North Wales, 50, 60 mile-per-hour wind gusts. And that wind driving spells of heavy and persistent rain, especially into the Pennines, North York Moors, parts of Northern Ireland, risk of disruption in places by the end of the day. To the south of that, it will be a mild afternoon with some bright spells, but also a lot of showers arriving into southern England, parts of Wales as well. Those showers merge into longer spells of rain through the evening to cause some very wet weather through mid-Wales into the Midlands, parts of East Anglia. Those areas that were badly affected at the weekend could see yet more rain. Rain by this stage easing off across Northern Ireland and Northern England, but continuing in some places. Scotland seeing a brighter day with some sunny spells, but also a few showers coming in on a northerly wind for northern Scotland, and it will feel cold in that northerly. Now into the evening, the rain really intensifies through parts of Wales and the Midlands, and that's why there is a significant risk of flooding in those areas, and it continues for much of the night. It eventually sinks south, with the wind strengthening across parts of Wales and into Cornwall by the end of the night, 60, 70 mile-per-hour wind gusts. And then by the end of the night, that rain eventually is pulling away from the south, with the heaviest downpours clearing to the southeast by mid-morning. Brighter skies follow from the north, and it's a much improved picture by the afternoon for many parts of the UK. Having said that, we will have a cold wind arriving from the north across all parts of the UK, and there'll be further showers in 1 or 2 places.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. A couple of issues on the clockwise M60 this Thursday lunchtime. There's a broken down vehicle at the turn off for Denton Island. That's junction 24. So on the entry slip there, so that's partially blocked. An overturned car clockwise to around Ashton and the line at junction 23, so a lane shut and slow going. Big issue still for the M25 around Brentwood at the moment. That's junction 28. Anti-clockwise still completely blocked. Is queuing for about 2 miles before Romford at junction 29 for investigation work. Delays into London on the A12 and the A13 as a result. Clockwise looking very slow towards 28 as well, queuing back to junction 27. Also clockwise the M25 at 17 Maple Cross. It's slow going back to junction 16 following an earlier bump there. And for now, that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 37 minutes past 2. Now, Meta, they're the parent company of Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp. They're refraining from rolling out their latest AI tech in Europe and Britain because of EU regulation.
Thought we were outside the European Union.
Well, still got their regulation.
Well, their owner, Mark Zuckerberg, was showing off their latest gadgets this week. There he is, with his specs, including their latest high-tech smart glasses. Tom, I reckon you could probably pull off some of these specs. Look at those, fantastic. Why do we want these things? Look, why do we want
they're incredibly dorky, but this is early tech. This is just sort of glasses that you can put on, and then normal glasses where you can then sort of see floating screens in front of you. I mean, it's magic.
I think you and Mark Zuckerberg would get on like a house on fire.
Someone else who would probably get on with Mark Zuckerberg like a house on fire is broadcaster Andrew Ebron. Andrew, thanks for joining us.
It's an absolute pleasure. Yes, absolutely spectacular, isn't it?
Oh, fantastic.
Been here all week. But it is actually everything we've predicted in this very studio is now happening. So everything you can foresee about the future will become a reality. And you might remember Google Glass all those years ago, the very early ones, very clunky, all this sort of stuff. What these new ones can do, you can basically do online translation, you can see things in real time. Everything you can imagine is phenomenal. You can also get your AI assistant where you're using celebrity voices, again, as we predicted on here.
Yes.
So fascinating stuff.
But the big story here is that America is getting all of this wonderful new tech, all of this futuristic new tech. It's not just Meta and Mark Zuckerberg, it's also OpenAI's ChatGPT, the new voice mode, not available in Europe. All to do with regulation.
Yeah, it's all to do with data, and I always say data is the new currency. Basically, if your product is free, then you are the product. And what you're doing is you're giving away data. So ever since Facebook has been founded, they basically, within their terms and conditions, can use some of your data, like some of your posts and your pictures and various other things, to train the AI models. That's what you need. So basically, it's the data in which will basically enable you to have all this data out. But the GDPR puts certain restrictions on that, because you might remember Clearview, for example. They scanned lots of images, facial recognition, to train those machines, and they were fined millions as a result of it. If you go back to Cambridge Analytica before the previous election, and what happened, they were using data from Facebook, basically to influence the election, if you like. This is how you appeal to Emily and Tom. This is the sort of stuff that pushes their buttons, and that information is power. So we work on that sort of basis. As you know, I have Errol Musk, who's Elon's father, on my show every week, and in fact every day this week, talking about the latest developments. And he says the biggest problem they've got is about those regulations. So the UK is missing out. And what I've said from the very beginning, I want to put the AI into Britain. We should make sure we should be front and centre, so we need to look at this very quickly.
Right. OK, well, we're missing out on things like smart glasses that can remind you where you parked your car, and a digital assistant that can respond to questions in the voice of Dame Judi Dench.
Yes.
And I'm sure other people as well. I mean, all of this stuff, to a lot of people, just... let's say a little bit scary. Well, a little bit. Why do you want to talk to a bot all day?
Yeah, well, but also, and I'll tell you why. ChatGPT, for example, there was a survey done in California, at the University of California, San Diego, which said chatting to ChatGPT was more effective than chatting to your GP. Not only because you can get an appointment quickly, but it's more sensitive, more empathetic. It's got more knowledge. And if you can imagine every doctor having access to the world's leading authorities on their desktop, so you could share that information. How powerful is that?
Is more empathetic than a
I'm not,
GP.
but the people in the university, and absolutely, they tested it independently.
Well, that's just depressing. Why even have relationships with human beings?
But Emily, I suppose...
Why not just talk to a bot?
What people do,
yes. Here is that this sort of magic stuff is being invented.
Yes.
And we could choose to use it or choose not to use it, but instead, it seems that the government
is deciding,
is choosing that we can't use it, we can't access it. And, Andrew, I mean... There are lots of economists who say that this will be the biggest change in our lives since the Industrial Revolution. We will go from likely having very low growth to the countries that have this sort of implemented. The kind of growth rates could be just a step change. I mean, there will be certain countries that live in something that looks like the future, looks like Star Trek, and the countries that don't will be the equivalent of third world countries.
No, you're absolutely right.
Do we risk becoming a relative third world country if we don't adopt it.
You have to adopt AI. And I always say, look, AI, everybody loves it. AI is our greatest human achievement, but also potentially the biggest existential threat. And what you need to do is to understand the capabilities, but make sure we have limitations on what happens. It is a brilliant co-pilot. You might remember last year at Bletchley Park, we had the first AI safety summit in the world. And Elon Musk, my mate, and various others came along and they spoke there. We had GBNews were present there as well.
Yes,
fantastic. And front and centre. And Rishi Sunak, who announcing several data centres and stuff like that, make sure Labour can get the benefit as well. You turn around on that sort of basis. We should be front and centre of this. We have to understand the capabilities. And I talk around the world, back to the futurists, I talk around the world about those capabilities, but also understanding the threat. If we close our eyes to it, that's where the limitations are going to happen.
Andrew, these guys, though, Mark Zuckerberg,
Yes.
Elon Musk and the like, they've got more power than the Prime Minister. They've got more power than even the President of the United States in some ways. I mean, they're creating this technology that does, as you say, have the power to cause quite a bit of trouble.
Oh, absolutely. And Elon Musk...
So it does need to be regulated.
Oh, no, it does. I think
safety.
It certainly needs. We need to have safeguards in place.
But the thing is, the existential risks from this
Yes.
will come about wherever it's created.
Yes.
I mean, it's still being created in America. We can't stop America creating it.
And also, apart from the seismic advances in medicine, we're having the lame can walk, the people who've been paralysed are suddenly getting all sorts of capabilities. There's a wonderful company called Neuralink, another one of Elon's companies, where basically they're saying now the people who've been blind for life can see again.
I mean,
they've been paralysed.
I don't think you'll be so keen on AI when it takes our jobs.
I thought it's already taken ours. This has not been...
Oh, no.
Hologram version of me and Tom.
That's what
more
the
empathetic than
the
us.
peasants in the field said about the combine
More
harvest.
intelligent than us. More empathetic than us. Better looking than us.
Impossible. Impossible. How could you possibly say
more
that?
encyclopedic knowledge
that's
politics
possible.
in Westminster than even you, Tom.
I think that when whenever
Careful what
a new
you wish for.
technology, whenever a new technology comes along, people say this is going to no one's going to have any jobs anymore, and new jobs that we couldn't even possibly imagine will be thought up.
Would you rather have
will be amongst the stars?
Would you rather have a bot version of Emily as a friend?
No, because I think actually the jobs that will become most important are the human connection jobs, while the robots do all of the sort of menial tasks that are very, very dull. But I mean, the films have been predicting
But they're cleverer than us already,
for
aren't they?
decades,
The bots.
and now it's kind of happening. But I suppose the risk is we're going to miss out on that coming revolution.
Don't miss out. Don't over-regulate is the absolute thing.
Well, there we go. Well, let us know what you think at home. gbnews.com/your say. Do you think we should be pioneers and not over-regulate this area, this sector of great growth? We shall see. We've got lots more coming up. Well, we've got one story left on the show this afternoon. Yes, Harry and Meghan, a little bit of trouble with the old PR. We'll reveal after the break.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Founded in 1990 in Knightsbridge in London, the Beverly Hills Bakery offers some of the finest American baked goods in the United Kingdom. Beverly Hills Bakery has delivered gifts to all the UK Prime Ministers of the last 20 years, with, I think, the exception of Sir Keir Starmer so far, and provided gifts for the royal family and for royal births. As we near the 35th anniversary of the bakery, I'm joined by the owner and head pastry chef, Rosa de Souza, and Manuel de Souza, who is the director of the Beverly Hills Bakery. How marvellous to see you both. Welcome to GB News.
Thank you for inviting us.
So, why has this formula worked? Why did London need a Beverly Hills Bakery?
What we do is we're a bakery, but underlying it's actually a gifting experience.
Right.
So this is an alternative to flowers. So in terms of concept, that has maintained its originality despite going on for 35 years. And in fact, what I do is I often ask myself, why is it going strong? To remind myself to focus on those things that we need to focus on.
So instead of sending a bunch of flowers, you send a beautiful box of cakes like that, or confection like that, complete with bunnies and so on.
Exactly. So you have the concept on the one hand, but you also need the quality of product that goes inside. And I think that's where Beverly Hills Bakery has got a great product.
And it's where Rosa comes in, isn't it?
Yes.
So when did you start to bake? Did you start to bake domestically in your home, and did it spread from there?
We started from home. My mother's baking, where we didn't have all the stoves and things like that. We
We baked on the charcoal, you know, like the greens.
Yes.
And we started baking. I learned from my mother the baking.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 48 minutes past 2. Now, here's one for you. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have begun a PR fight back to try and improve their public image. This after receiving a lot of negative publicity, both at home and abroad. I don't know if home was... Does that mean the United States and Britain, or Britain and the United States? I can't... Which one's home?
I think the United States now,
yeah.
isn't it? Yeah. California. Well, in an article published in American celebrity magazine Us Weekly, several former members of the couple's staff heap the praise upon them, with one even describing them as the best bosses he ever had. That's a bit much, isn't it?
Well, this comes after they were heavily criticised by several other former members of their staff, which included accusations that Meghan Markle was a dictator in high heels who belittles people.
Yes, the couple themselves have also been branded poor decision-makers who always change their minds. And there was that Spotify executive, wasn't there, who called them grifters, which was probably the harshest thing I've heard from someone with some status. Anyway, we can now discuss this further with royal biographer and former royal editor at The Sun, Duncan Larkham. Thank you very much indeed, Duncan. This PR blitz, I mean, how real is this? Are they actually, Meghan and Harry, very worried about how they're coming across?
Well, I mean, that's if you accept it's a PR blitz, which I think most people do. Obviously, they're worried about all these claims of staff that have left them, that have worked for them for 5 minutes, then done a runner. You know, this is not a news story in many ways, because we know that Meghan has been accused of being incredibly hard to work for, even before they left for their Californian dream.
And this is an interesting set of developments because there has been, as far as I've understood it, a difference of public opinion in the United States compared to the United Kingdom. In the United Kingdom, both Harry and Meghan have very low approval ratings, but in the United States, there have been higher ratings. Is this a suggestion that actually things were turning a bit sour in the United States if now Us Weekly is putting out these puff pieces?
Yeah, it certainly shows that the couple are concerned about these criticisms, and Us Weekly is a very widely read publication out in America. But I think it crosses. I mean, the Daily Beast have torn into them and quoted unnamed sources as to say that she's like, well, effectively like a Cruella de Vil character to work for. And I think it sort of re-emphasises this point that Meghan is being portrayed as pure Marmite. You either love her or you loathe her.
I mean, Duncan, which one is it then? No, which one is it? Is she a dictator in high heels who belittles people, or is she the best boss ever? I mean, which one?
Well,
she can't be both.
Well, Harry's got into the habit recently of suing people that say the wrong thing, so I perhaps might not answer that as honestly as I'd want. But no, I mean, I think you can only look at the evidence, and the evidence tells us that at least 18 members of staff, I think, at the last count, over the years have left. Some of those were palace staff who worked very happily with other members of the royal family. I can remember meeting a royal protection officer back in the day before they left the UK, and I said to him, you know, is she really as bad as all that? And all he did was roll his eyes. So I suppose you can you can draw your conclusions. But I don't want to, and I really don't want to be sued by them, if that's okay.
That's absolutely fine, Duncan. We shall leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for coming on the show.
Thank
Duncan Larkham, former royal editor at The Sun. Fantastic stuff, thank you. Yes, she can't really be both, can she? Can't really be both the Cruella de Vil character and also the best boss ever. Maybe you can. Maybe you can. For different people, perhaps.
Or maybe different past employees have sort of incentives to sort of massively big it up one way or massively big up the other. Maybe she's neither a glorious heroine nor the most evil person to walk the face of the earth. Maybe it's somewhere in between.
Maybe it's somewhere in between. Aren't you nice? Aren't you nice? Tom, I thought we had a little bit of time to finish the show by having a look at what people have said about the old AI discussion. Jez says the British economy will change over the next decade a lot. More AI and robots replacing humans. This will then need a universal income for people, so to avoid civil unrest. I hope not, because I don't think that would be a good idea. But you never know. You never know. Will the robots take over everything?
Well, Hugh says that peasants were right to fear the combine harvester. Herefordshire is now a middle-class garden suburb.
That's quite funny. David says, hi, Tom. Before waxing lyrical about advancements in AI, please be aware that governments want everything digitised so they can fill the new data centres, warehouses full of computers with every detail of our lives through digital ID. And they're like, are you worried about that?
I think
the government having too much of your data? Even Mark Zuckerberg having too much of your data? Think what he could do with it.
They've got it all already.
They've got it all already, yes, to be fair, they do. But if you were completely off the grid, you'd be safe from any of that.
Yeah, I will. Well, but this is the thing. Allowing AI in the country is different from having to use AI.
No, it's not, because you would have to use it. You'd have to use it. You know, whether it's in work, school, college, to use government websites or whatever, I don't know. You would have to use it.
You wouldn't have to give it all of your data, though.
Well, maybe not.
But
maybe
I mean,
not. I think you would.
The debate rages on. Thank you very much for joining us here on Good Afternoon Britain this afternoon. We're, of course, back tomorrow. Up next, it's Martin Daubney.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Yet more wet weather on the way today and overnight as well, with the risk of flooding in places. There will be some brighter interludes out there, mostly towards the far south of the UK and the far north in between. This frontal system causing persistent wet weather and strong winds. The strongest of the winds expected across parts of northern England into North Wales, 50, 60 mile-per-hour wind gusts. And that wind driving spells of heavy and persistent rain, especially into the Pennines, North York Moors, parts of Northern Ireland. Risk of disruption in places by the end of the day. To the south of that, it will be a mild afternoon with some bright spells, but also a lot of showers arriving into southern England, parts of Wales as well. Those showers merge into longer spells of rain through the evening to cause some very wet weather through mid-Wales into the Midlands, parts of East Anglia. Those areas that were badly affected at the weekend could see yet more rain. Rain by this stage easing off across Northern Ireland and Northern England, but continuing in some places. Scotland seeing a brighter day with some sunny spells, but also a few showers coming in on a northerly wind for northern Scotland, and it will feel cold in that northerly. Now, into the evening, the rain really intensifies through parts of Wales and the Midlands, and that's why there is a significant risk of flooding in those areas, and it continues for much of the night. It eventually sinks south, with the wind strengthening across parts of Wales and into Cornwall by the end of the night, 60, 70 mile-per-hour wind gusts. And then by the end of the night, that rain eventually is pulling away from the south, with the heaviest downpours clearing to the southeast by mid-morning. Brighter skies follow from the north, and it's a much improved picture by the afternoon for many parts of the UK. Having said that, we will have a cold wind arriving from the north across all parts of the UK, and there'll be further showers in one or two places.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's an incredible good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
The king of breakfast TV is back. That's right, Britain's favourite TV host, Eamon Holmes, returns to Britain's hottest breakfast programme. Breakfast every day from 6 a.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A very, very good afternoon to you. It's 3 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show here on GB News. We're broadcasting for you live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. On today's show, Sir Keir Starmer.
Wearing masks and working from home if we can really will help prevent infections.
Sir Keir Starmer is under fresh fire, this time for faking Lord Addy's £118 million mansion was his lockdown workplace with his backbenchers and even his supportive media turning on him. Is this the final blow for Starmer's credibility, the Prime Minister of hypocrisy? And on yesterday's show here on GB News, Sir Keir Starmer